Imagine you're driving across a bridge to visit a friend. The next day, you get in your car to go back, but there is no longer a river under the bridge you drove across yesterday. Believe it or not, this is exactly what happened to people in the south of Honduras when Category 5 Hurricane Mitch hit in October 1998. Choluteca Bridge, which the local authorities reconstructed earlier that year, was left in the dry, as the river now flowed around it, not under it. The structure soon became famous online as the Bridge to Nowhere. This waterway shifted its course overnight, but it normally happens over longer spans of time. A river will stop flowing straight when there is even the tiniest change in the landscape around it. Even something as tiny as a mouse can weaken a riverbank. Imagine a family of mice decides to start a home somewhere by the river and digs a cozy hole. Over time, water gets inside this hole and starts washing away any loose soil. Give it a couple of centuries, and the river will now have a bend in this place. And if you're worried about the mice family, don't be, because they moved out a long time before the water flooded their home. Things happen even faster for small streams because, well, their beds are also smaller. The current breaks down stones, the ground takes them in, and voila, a riverbed or bottom is formed. The current is the strongest in the middle of the waterway, and its power directly shapes the riverbed. The water flowing through rivers is full of soil and other particles. All this stuff goes from the spring into the mouth of a river and into Earth's oceans. In some cases, these particles build up at some point, and that's how new beaches, probably including your favorite, are born from fine-grained sand. On the other side of the river, the flow of water is much faster, so this fast-moving current literally slams against the next bank. Then, the process of erosion starts all over again. River erosion is what happens when the flowing water takes away soil. And I have to tell you, things go super fast there. That water is so energetic, it can even carve into rocks, creating a canyon. If the riverbanks consist of loose material, such as humus, that's the soil you plant a flower in, then it is easier for the flowing water to erode it. Rivers in the plains are often wide and slow because there's little resistance from the ground around them. So you don't have to worry about waves tipping over your boat on a flatland river. In the mountains, streams quickly wash away all the surface soil and gravel, revealing the bedrock beneath them. It's tightly bound, so mountain streams are literally set in stone, as they cannot wash away this bedrock. So we have erosion to blame for waterways changing their course, and also mountains and hills. When a stream reaches a mountain or simply a rock, it has two choices: to flow around it or carve its way through it. In flatlands, rivers don't have any natural competition, so they choose a more winding path. All this twisting and turning increases the river's total length from the source to the mouth. One such example is the mighty Mississippi River in the U.S. It has a lot of curves and bends, which are called meanders. In the last century and a half alone, the Mississippi changed its course several times. The last major case was in 1876 when it left the historic city of Vicksburg in the dry. 2 years later, a team of American engineers came to the area to construct the Yazoo Diversion Canal, which took 25 years to complete. Thanks to it, ships could once again sail to Vicksburg, reviving the town's economy. What happened in this southern U.S. town in the 19th century is an ordinary natural consequence of river erosion. The bends in a waterway grow sharper over time, making the water flow faster. This speeds up erosion, and individual bends slowly start approaching each other to the point they merge. When this happens, the river straightens up overnight, leaving a lake in the form of a horseshoe in the place where the bend was. This newly formed body of water is called an oxbow lake. These still water lakes either dry up, since they're no longer fed by a spring, or they turn into swamps. In some cases, humans use them as water meadows used for agriculture. Lake Shakot in Arkansas is the largest oxbow lake in North America, formed by the Mississippi several centuries ago. The source of the Mississippi is a lake in Minnesota, but a river can also start when two other watercourses become one, or when the water simply bubbles up from under the ground. Even melting snow can feed a river, like the Amazon gets its water from the Andes. Determining the source of a waterway can be tricky, so the debate about whether Amazon or the Nile is longer is still ongoing. What scientists know for certain is that the Amazon carries more water than any other river. 1/5 of all the fresh water that enters Earth's oceans comes from this South American river. When you look at the Amazon River on a map, you'll notice how it flows from Peru to Brazil, that is, from the west to the east. This direction might seem odd when you compare it to the Mississippi, which flows to the south on the map. It's so confusing because you probably know rivers flow down, affected by gravity. But down doesn't automatically mean south. Running water will try to find the easiest route down, so there are no rules in terms of cardinal directions. The Nile River is the best example of this, as it actually flows north into the Mediterranean Sea. Northern Egypt, where all those pyramids are located, is on lower ground than Sudan, where the Nile is formed when the Blue Nile and the White Nile merge. Up in northern Asia and the Mackenzie River in Canada both flow northwest, while the Yellow River in East Asia flows in the same direction as Amazon, to the east into the Pacific Ocean. These major rivers are some of the best examples that a stream doesn't have to flow from the north to the south. Gravity is the only important factor that determines which way a stream will flow, as running water is all the time pulled downwards. The flow of water is faster on steeper slopes. When there's a sudden drop in the flow, waterfalls form. Angel Falls in Venezuela is the highest waterfall on the planet, with water dropping from a height of 2,600 feet. Watch your step. In a waterfall, the falling water can easily reach the speed of a Thompson's gazelle, but as a river approaches the end of its journey, it slows down significantly. The stream doesn't have enough energy to cut into the nearby land. All the sediment it has picked up along the way, such as sandstone, slows it down. At the place where a river meets the ocean or a lake, it gets rid of this sediment along its banks, creating a delta, an area rich in fertile soil. The Ganges in India has the biggest delta in the world, several hundred miles wide and visible from space. The Amazon, on the other side, doesn't have a true delta because the strong currents of the Atlantic Ocean wash away everything the torrent brings. The deepest section of the riverbed that runs along its middle is called a channel. This is where the current is the strongest, so ships travel on top of these channels. When engineers want to expand a waterway, they simply dig a deeper channel and voila, larger ships can now pass. This is just one way humans alter watercourses. We often strengthen the banks of a river to prevent erosion or build dams that stop or divert the flow of water. The oldest operational dam on the planet dates back to the time of Egyptian pharaohs. It was, of course, the first damn thing. There's a beautiful island in the Atlantic Ocean 25 miles off the coast of Brazil. It's easy to reach, has an endless beach line, steep rocks to climb, and vibrant tropical greenery. Yet there isn't a single hotel here, no one's hiking on all those rocks, no one's watching sunsets by the ocean, and you'll never see kids build sandcastles on the beach. People left this island a long time ago and will unlikely ever come back to live here. It's been long since taken over by creatures you'd rather never meet. Ilha da Queimada Grande has the highest concentration of venomous snakes in the world. It's the only natural habitat of the golden lancehead viper, one of the most dangerous snakes on the planet. Somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 of these critters live here. They say you're never more than 3 feet away from meeting one of them on the island. They're like life insurance salesmen. Lancehead vipers have venom that's 3 to 5 times stronger than that of their closest mainland relatives. Evolution helped them to develop it to keep them properly fed. Their only prey is birds that visit the island to rest. Lanceheads have to slither up the rocks for lunch and can't wait and trace those birds like other snakes. So they developed a super venom that works almost instantly. One legend says the snakes ended up in the middle of the ocean thanks to pirates. They were looking for a good place to hide their booty, their gold. The island was a perfect match. They also needed something to protect their treasures from any invaders. So they brought some snakes, and those multiplied quickly. A more realistic explanation involves not humans, but rising sea levels. Snake Island used to be part of the Brazilian mainland, but the sea isolated it from the rest of the country around 11,000 years ago. The snakes that ended up on that island were able to spread and thrive because they had no predators to bother them. And when people tried to, let's just say it didn't end well. Another island legend is about a fisherman who came here to pick bananas. He didn't expect he'd have the company of venomous snakes, and they were ecstatic about a new item on the menu. The fisherman ran for his life back to the water, but had been bitten before he managed to jump into his boat. A couple days later, his boat was found, but he didn't make it through the journey. Snake Island has long been uninhabited, but it used to have a human population for a few years, from 1909 to 1920. It was the lighthouse keeper, his wife, and 3 kids. Their task was not to let people on the island. According to another legend, one night snakes got inside their house through the windows. The parents grabbed their kids and tried to escape to the boat. Sadly, the snakes were faster. No one of the family had survived that visit. The lighthouse has been automated. Now the Navy visit it regularly to check if it's in order and keep visitors away from the island. It's both for the safety of people and for the good of snakes that are a critically endangered species. Some of those people are tourists looking for adventures. Others are smugglers that capture and sell lanceheads for $10,000 to $30,000. Animal collectors and scientists are willing to pay that price. There are rumors that the venom helps cure heart conditions. In the past, someone tried to set the island on fire to get rid of the snakes altogether and clear the land for agriculture. But the snakes have an important mission. It's crucial to study them to better understand the whole lancehead snake family and to treat people who get bitten by them on the mainland. Such incidents happen a lot in Brazil. If you really want to visit the island, you have to be one of those biologists or researchers who use it as a real-life lab to study the golden lanceheads. You must go through a lot of paperwork and get an official permission for a visit. There will also always be a doctor in the group to help others if something goes wrong, and Navy officers to make it safe. Elsewhere, there are places where people do survive alongside snakes. Musambo Island on Lake Victoria in Uganda is home to 2,000 snakes and less than 100 people. That's a ratio of over 20 snakes per person. Rock pythons, cobras, vipers. You can find those even in people's houses. Sometimes they share beds with the locals. They believe the island is home to many kinds of spirits that have transformed into snakes. The people are just guests here, and they must never ever hurt those snakes. Even if you find a cobra under your pillow, you aren't supposed to scream for help. You'll scare away good luck. And if you hurt a snake, well, prepare to pack your bags and leave the island for good. There are also monitor lizards on the island. The snakes live in peace with them and the locals. They feed mainly on bird eggs and won't attack you first. The real danger of North Sentinel Island isn't the snakes, it's the people. The island, about the size of Manhattan and surrounded by corals, is home to one of the most isolated tribes on the planet, the Sentinelese. They're a hunter-gatherer society that doesn't welcome any strangers at all. The only safe outside visit took place in 1967. Based on what they saw back then, anthropologists guess there could be anywhere between 50 and a couple hundred people living on the island. No one else in the world speaks or understands their language. Another dangerous place is Makajima Island in Japan, south of Tokyo. It's famous for the active volcano it sits on. There have been 6 eruptions in the last century alone. Poisonous gas has been leaking through the ground ever since the latest incident in 2000. For years, all residents and tourists had to carry gas masks at all times when on the island. When the siren went off, it was a sign to put it on immediately. It meant the sulfur levels in the air had dangerously risen. Luckily, it's been years since the gas masks were necessary. Volcanic activity made Lake Kivu in Africa a dangerous place as well. It sits exactly where tectonic plates are slowly moving away from one another. It makes the Earth's crust thinner and the volcanoes more active. That's why there are hot springs under Fougou that send hot water, carbon dioxide, and methane into the lake. Microorganisms that live in the lake generate more methane. All these gases remain in the water because the lake is really deep. This mix is denser than regular lake water, so the lake has unusual layers. Fougou is dangerous because all the gases trapped in it could find a way out. That would be a disaster. Saba is a tiny Caribbean island that's seen more storms in the last 150 years than any other place in the world. There were over 60 big hurricanes, 15 Category 3 storms, and 7 Category 5 ones, the most destructive a hurricane can get. If you want to try your luck, visit in winter. You'll be less likely to witness a storm, but landing will still tickle your nerves. Saba also happens to have one of the shortest and most dangerous runways on the planet, stuck between two rocky ridges. Bouvet Island is the loneliest and most remote one in the world. The nearest piece of land is 1,000 miles north, and the Antarctic coast is 1,100 miles to the south. Fewer than 100 people have ever been here, mostly scientists that used to work at a research station. If you decided to travel there, the journey would take days. If something went wrong, there would be no one to save you in time. Plus, 93% of the island is covered with a glacier, and there's just one appropriate place to moor a boat. Hey, sounds like fun! Sign me up! Not. Mount Washington in the US gets way more visitors, but not everyone comes back safely. It's known as the most dangerous small mountain on the planet. The winds here are the fastest on the surface of the Earth, reaching 200 miles per hour. Hey, let's go fly a kite, huh? Freezing temperatures and heavy snowfalls don't help the ascent either. Hikers are often steered away from trails and roads. Even if you do make it to the top, you'll experience overloads like on the peak of Mount Everest.
A girl, once and beautiful, ended up in a grave with a huge sickle across her neck. There were no signs of violence, no indications of any actual crime. Yet, someone was clearly terrified when they forced her into that grave. So scared that they even placed a padlock on the big toe of her left foot. They wanted her to stay in the tomb once and for all, fearing she might rise and take revenge on them. So, a whole community turned against a young lady who wasn't even over 20 years old, deeming her to be of ultimate danger. Do you see what I'm driving at? Let's test your historical knowledge. Who has been feared throughout human history to such an extent that commoners couldn't shake off that lingering sense of dread, even after their passing? If you say witches, warlocks, and vampires, you'd be completely correct. Just a little hint here. If you can't overpower someone physically, you can do it supernaturally. Well, that's at least what people used to think back in the 17th century. Not only was there a sickle and a padlock, but there were also signs of an attempt to twist the girl's corpse in the grave and turn it face down. This attempt had failed, leaving her spine buckled and twisted. By the way, the padlock wasn't necessarily meant to lock a vampire. It was more likely a talisman against evil spirits. That's a peculiar and, let's face it, very cruel way to bury someone. Yet it was a common practice for creating anti-vampire burial sites. The methods for preventing vampires from rising were quite elaborate. First off, let me introduce a term. Anti-vampire graves, known as revenant graves, date back thousands of years and have been found in various locations across Europe. Europe, you heard that right. Now before you say, hey, vampires are a Romanian thing, Dracula, duh, let me convince you otherwise. They are a part of all European folklore, meaning you can find references to them throughout Europe. With new settlements in America, vampire lore spread there too, eventually turning into the Twilight Saga. These anti-vampire burials are characterized by evidence of precautions taken to prevent those who bit the dust from rising. Such measures could include placing large stones on the deceased's legs or even piercing the body with a lance to fix it to the ground. To be completely safe, they could also consider removing the head from the torso. So, Burying the body face down, cutting off the head, and pressing the body with a stone were the methods used to keep someone believed to be a demonic being from leaving the grave. Let's return to the poor lady, or rather, the girl. A couple of archaeologists, Dariusz Poliński and his partner, Magna Durodzka, who happened to be partners in both crime and life, stumbled upon her grave. Strangely, all of her 206 bones remained untouched. Yet no gravestone, no name, nothing. Just a lonely grave on a hill in northern Poland. Poliński, a professor of archaeology, and Zagrodzka began piecing together the story of the woman they eventually named Zosia. Carbon dating suggested she had been about 18 years old and had passed away about 350 years ago during a chaotic time in Poland's history. There is little documentation about this graveyard, which seemed to serve as a resting place for individuals marginalized by the community. Was Zosia a poor girl who had been marginalized because life forced her into the worst situation a lady could face? Not really. As the archaeologists delved deeper, they stumbled upon some hints that indicated she might have hailed from a rich family. Her burial featured a stylish bonnet, and the delicate silk along with shiny silver and gold threads found with it suggested that it was part of an elegant headdress. This all pointed to the idea that she had some serious status or wealth. But the way she was buried indicated her outsider status in the village of Pien. Perhaps her presence there was unwanted, hence the idea of her being a vampire, backed up by the manner in which she was forced into the grave and held there. By analyzing the structure of her skull and extricating DNA from her skeleton, scientists created a reconstruction of what her face might have looked like. The specialists meticulously reshaped Zosia's likeness using modeling clay on a 3D printed model of her skull, which proved to be a deeply moving experience. They remarked that while they often worked on face reconstructions, in this case, they also sought to restore her dignity. Utilizing these three methods, the team reconstructed Zosia's 400-year-old face, revealing the human story buried beneath supernatural beliefs. It's ironic, isn't it? First, people tried their hardest to make the world forget her face and prevent her from ever coming back. 400 years later, people did everything they could to bring her back to life. Her picture now is all over the internet, yet we will never see the faces of those who buried her. Alas, this reconstruction project only allows viewers to visually connect with Zosia, but her true story remains a mystery. But what we know for sure is that people who were deemed vampires were badly discriminated against, to say the least. Rumor had it that hungry vampires would even steal people to quench their thirst. Let's use math to prove this rumor wrong and prove that Zosia wasn't one of them. Back in the year 1600, there were only 537 million people worldwide. Yeah, this data may not be very accurate, but it's pretty close to reality. A physicist, Kostas Eftimiou, calculated that if a vampire had been drinking one person's blood each month, humanity would have faced extinction within a few years. Starting with one vampire and a population of 537 million in 1600, this math shows we'd have no humans left by July 1602. But here we are now. Well, while placing a stone on a corpse to make sure the vampire doesn't rise may be something new to you, there are also a bunch of stereotypical things associated with these creatures that you definitely know, such as garlic and mirrors. Funnily enough, even though it's all based on a bunch of superstitions, there's pretty good logic behind the garlic thing. You see, it contains a special compound called allicin, which is a powerful antibiotic. While people back then couldn't know what an antibiotic was, they noticed garlic was pretty effective against various conditions. Since they believed vampires were created by a particular blood condition, they also believed garlic could defeat a vampire. And there's more. There's actually a blood condition called porphyria, which makes people look like real vampires. Their skin is pale and their teeth get bigger as their gums shrink. And guess what? People who have porphyria cannot consume garlic, as it worsens their condition. Wow, that's a cool coincidence. The next superstition is a bit fresher, and it's about vampires avoiding mirrors. The first known reference to the mirrors comes from the book Dracula, in 1897. But why wouldn't a vampire show a reflection? Simple. Before the plastic era we live in, mirrors were traditionally backed with silver. Silver was commonly believed to repel evil spirits, possibly because it has antimicrobial properties. Much like garlic, its healing properties may be what was supposed to scare off a vampire. Another reason why suspected vampires may have avoided mirrors is the changes to their appearance from conditions commonly confused with vampirism, like porphyria and rabies. People afflicted with these conditions may have avoided looking in mirrors for that reason, causing others to assume that vampires avoided mirrors. But if you ever met a vampire and these methods don't repel it, I have one more trick for you. Ask the potential vampire to count. It can be spilled grains, seeds, or even the holes in the fishing net if you happen to have one. Vampires are into math, so they'll stop to count, delaying them until sunrise. And we all know that vampires don't do well in sunlight. Ironically, it's Count Von Count, a vampire who teaches us how to count on Sesame Street. The ground suddenly starts shaking. Clouds of gas start forming in the sky, making it dark during broad daylight. Bits of the ground start swelling, lifting, and even collapsing. These are the telltale signs of a volcano that is bound to erupt. And this is what could easily happen again with Mount Spur. It's only about 75 miles from Anchorage, one of Alaska's busiest cities. More than half of the population of the northernmost state of the US live there. There's also a huge amount of air cargo that passes through its international airport daily. So anytime a volcano this close to such a vital hub begins to get restless, people start paying attention. Just FYI, approximately 350 million people in the world live within the danger range of an active volcano. That means that around 1 out of 20 people live in an area at risk of volcanic activity. Alaskans probably wish that Spur's reawakening was fiction, but it's actually true. The Alaska Volcano Observatory picked up on several of these "I'm about to erupt" signs from Mount Spur. So much so that they raised the alert level to yellow, which means unrest above normal background levels. Spur erupted twice in the 90s, and it was pretty intense. If we were ranking volcanic eruptions on a scale from 1 to 10, these eruptions would rank a 6 or 7. Not that terrible, but still worth 10 to 17 million in damages. However, these numbers are nothing compared to Alaska's 1988 Redoubt eruption, another volcano that erupted and summed up a staggering $345 million in damages. Mainly because its ashes hit aircraft engines, such as the KLM 747 that lost power after all its engines went off due to the ashes. If people weren't paying attention to Alaska's unstable geology before that, well, they surely started to after it. When you think of the hazards of volcanic activity, the first thing that might possibly pop in your mind is Pompeii, Italy. Of course, that's the worst-case scenario, a city being engulfed by lava. Spur may seem innocent compared to Vesuvio, but it still took its toll. The last time it erupted in the 90s, and it threw volcanic aerosols over 60,000 feet into the atmosphere. Let's get our science straight here. Think of volcanic aerosols like liquid particles that are released into the atmosphere during an eruption. These particles are usually created when gases from a volcano, such as sulfur dioxide, combine with water and other particles that exist in our atmosphere. These aerosols can actually cool the Earth's surface since they reflect sunlight directly back into space. And that's not the worst part. It can stay in the atmosphere for several years after an eruption, causing lots of health issues. The eruption unleashed blazing fast avalanches of hot gas and ash called pyroclastic flows, along with thick, muddy floods known as lahars. Oh, and there were also the massive volcanic boulders. These rock chunks were huge, some over 3 feet long, and they blasted out from the volcano like nature's cannonballs, landing more than 6 miles away. All that volcanic heat melted part of a nearby glacier, kicking off debris flows that dammed up the Chacachatna River and created a whole new lake along the valley. Some good came out of Spur's first eruption, though. The main lesson was, volcanic monitoring pays off. The local monitoring was able to reduce the economic damage done by the eruption, especially for a city that has an intense air traffic. Spur is deemed as dormant for the moment, but it could go off anytime soon. You see, volcanoes are classified as active, dormant, or extinct, depending on how much action they're putting on. If it's still active, it's still rumbling and erupting somewhat regularly. Dormant means it's had some recent activity, but it's still lying low for now. And extinct, that's when it's been quiet for such a long time that we figure it's done for good. One of the US's most dangerous active volcanoes is Mount St. Helens. This volcano is actually responsible for the most powerful eruption in US history. Its last blast was so intense, it threw off about 1,300 feet off its summit. Basically, the top of the mountain vanished, and if you thought Mount Spur's ash cloud was impressive, St. Helens wins the competition since it launched its ashes 80,000 feet into the sky. Eastern Washington plunged into total darkness. But it wasn't just that. In a matter of 3 minutes, the eruption hurled 3.7 billion cubic yards of blazing rock and dust, enough to fill 1 million Olympic-sized pools across 230 square miles of lush forest. Actually, the earthquakes that anticipated the eruption started weeks before May 18, 1980. A ground shake of magnitude 5.0 went off, triggering a landslide on one side of the volcano. By the end of the official eruption date, 57 people had lost their lives. Nearly 7,000 big-game animals like deer and elk were wiped out, and millions of birds laid scattered on the burnt earth. Researchers don't think St. Helens will blow at the same magnitude again anytime soon, but they're keeping an eye on it, because this volcano is not exactly finished. By the way, the word volcano comes from the Roman name Vulcan, which was the Roman deity of fire, and they often happen at the meeting point of tectonic plates, which are the pieces of the Earth's surface that fit together like a jigsaw puzzle. The so-called Ring of Fire, located in the Pacific Ocean, is the world's danger zone when it comes to volcanoes. It contains between 750 and 915 active volcanoes. The largest volcano located in the Ring of Fire, also the largest active volcano in the world, is the Mauna Loa. It's over 13,000 feet high, and it's located in Hawaii. Researchers say that Mauna Loa has been erupting for at least 700,000 years. Its most recent eruption began on the 27th of November 2022, and it lasted until December 13th. It's been quiet since the 80s until it decided to wake up again. Thanks to constant monitoring by the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, it didn't cause any casualties when it last erupted. Scientists have been investing big time on volcanic monitoring, not only to reduce economic hazards, but also to save lives. The most recent attempt has been to drill into volcanoes. Recently, a group of scientists went all the way to Iceland in one of the world's volcanic hotspots. There are around 33 active volcanoes in Iceland alone, but the one that is the most interesting to them the most is the Krafla volcano. The Krafla has erupted around 30 times in the last 1,000 years, and its most recent eruption was in the mid-1980s. The project named Krafla Magma Testbed, or KMT for short, is hoping to advance the understanding of how magma behaves underground. The main advantage of this drilling research is predicting the risk of eruptions, but it can also help to push geothermal energy forward. I mean, can you imagine having electricity that is run by the limitless source of volcano power? The KMT team will begin drilling holes deep into volcanic ground in 2027. They're aiming at reaching over a mile into the ground. After all, it's different to monitor lava activity when it's on the surface than when it is still below ground. This will allow researchers to listen to the pulse of the Earth, according to them. They're saying this research is as revolutionary as the first time man went to the moon. Oh, and speaking of that, I was shocked to discover that volcanoes exist all throughout the solar system. Yep, other planets and moons have volcanoes too. The largest volcano in our solar system is Olympus Mons on Mars. It's a shield volcano, much like the ones that make up the Hawaiian Islands. It's about 370 miles wide. If we transported it all the way back to Earth, it would almost occupy all of Poland. Yikes.
Ah, Phoenix. This sizzling gem in the Sonoran Desert isn't just another American city. It's more like a giant oven where you can throw a party, as long as you don't forget the ice. Seriously, if you find yourself here in the summer, brace yourself for some serious heat. We're talking about temperatures that regularly pass 100 degrees. And in 2024, Phoenix hit 110 degrees 55 times during the summer, tying the record set just the year before. Now, I get it if you're not a fan of hot weather, but apparently a lot of people love living in a sauna. Phoenix ranks as the 5th largest city in the United States, and it is the capital and most populous city in Arizona, with 1.7 million residents as of 2024. And if we're talking about the metropolitan area, also known as the Valley of the Sun, the population is almost 5 million. Yet, good luck finding someone actually born here. Out of every 4 Phoenix residents, 3 were born somewhere else. Believe it or not, Phoenix wasn't always this bustling, crowded place. It became one. A few decades ago, it was just a sleepy little dot on the map. Back in the 1940s, the population was around 65,000. It wasn't even close to cracking the top 100 list of the largest U.S. cities. Now, at that time, Phoenix was mostly an agricultural hub, and its economy revolved around what they called the 5 C's: cotton, citrus, cattle, climate, and copper. But things really started to change in the 1950s thanks to one life-changing invention. Drumroll please? The air conditioner. Actually, it was the portable version that came out in 1945, created by an American inventor named Robert Sherman. Phoenix residents owe a lot to Robert for making life bearable during scorching summers. Before AC, people in Phoenix would literally move their beds outside and build sleeping porches. They'd protect that kind of outdoorsy space with light curtains or some kind of net to keep the dust and bugs out. Fun. Anyway, the point is that the air conditioner played a big part in making Phoenix an easier place to live. Since the 1940s, this city in Arizona has transformed from a dusty little town into a sprawling urban jungle, and it's still one of the top 10 fastest-growing metro areas in the U.S. The best part is, it looks like that won't change anytime soon, since this 519-square-mile metropolis is surrounded by rolling desert, with plenty of room to keep growing as far as the eye can see. So, who's dropping everything to move to Phoenix? Well, Californians are the city's biggest fans. According to a recent survey, a third of all new renters moving to Phoenix come from Los Angeles. Okay, that survey might not be the most reliable since it only applies to the source's clients, but it does line up with U.S. Census Bureau data from 2019, which says that 70,000 Californians moved to Arizona in the previous year. The connection between Phoenix and LA is so strong that some people even call Phoenix the next LA. You've got to give Phoenix credit for capitalizing on its proximity to Southern California. The city offers lower taxes, fewer regulations, and lower costs of living, which makes it a magnet for businesses, especially in high-tech and service industries. So, in the 90s, Phoenix was considered a non-stop generator of jobs. In the last few years, we've seen the number of jobs only go up, and the unemployment rate has dropped by nearly half, going from 6.3 in January 2014 to 3.4 in the same month in 2024. Now, when it comes to big city problems, you can't avoid talking about traffic. But here's another reason why Phoenix is a dream city. It doesn't even come close to the traffic nightmares you find in places like LA. Estimates show that people in Los Angeles waste about 119 hours a year just sitting in traffic. But in Phoenix, it's more like 61 hours. Huge difference, huh? And let's not even start talking about the money people waste just sitting in traffic. In LA, drivers burn through about $2,440 worth of gas per year. In Phoenix, they waste 25 gallons of fuel, which ends up costing about $952. Yeah, that's still a lot of cash, but compared to LA, come on, that's a steal. Phoenix being okay in terms of traffic might have a lot to do with how the city was designed. Just take a look at a map of Phoenix. You'll notice it looks like someone took a ruler and drew perfectly straight lines for the roads. That's because the city was laid out in a grid system. This setup makes it so much easier to get around, especially compared to cities full of confusing twists, U-turns, and one-way streets. It just simplifies things, whether you're a local or a tourist. Plus, Phoenix has nice wide streets. Most cities have one major road and a bunch of narrow streets that just can't handle heavy traffic. But Phoenix has wide roads everywhere. So, when the freeways get jammed, you can just hop onto a parallel street and still get to work without stressing out too much. When you look at all the job opportunities and the relatively smooth traffic, it's no wonder people are willing to put up with the heat and move to Phoenix. But don't get it twisted, the heat is no joke. It is really, really hot and sunny out there. We're talking about 300 days of sunshine on average, or about 85% daylight hours per year. But once again, Phoenix has made the best of it. And all that constant sunshine has turned Phoenix into one of the top solar energy cities in the country. Now, you may be wondering, a city in the middle of the desert with barely any rain, do they actually have enough water? Well, they do. Phoenix has its water situation pretty well sorted out, thanks to multiple sources. I mean, they don't rely on rain alone, which is a good thing because, desert life. Most of their water comes from way up north and east of the valley, where snow melts off the mountains and flows into giant reservoirs, storing it up for those dry years. But most of Phoenix's water comes from the Salt River Project, which brings water through canals and pipelines from the Salt and Verde rivers. Then there is the Central Arizona Project, which transports water all the way from the Colorado River. They even get a bit of water from underground wells. And Phoenix doesn't want to waste a drop, so they're smart about recycling, reusing treated water to keep parks green, and even recharging their groundwater. Since Phoenix is all about sunny skies nearly every day of the year, it's normal that people can get a little moody when it actually rains. But here's the thing. Phoenix always gets a surprise up its sleeve, even when it comes to bad weather. When it rains in the deserts, locals get treated to this unique earthy smell. It's thanks to the creosote bush, a desert plant that releases an amazing fragrance when the rain hits it. People describe it as the smell of rain, and honestly, it's one of those fresh, clean scents that makes you forget you're in the desert for a second. And if you've never stopped to think about why Phoenix is called Phoenix, well, it's based on that famous legend of the bird that rises from the ashes. Now, after knowing all the special things about this city and its unique ability to turn challenges into advantages, we can say the name couldn't have been better chosen.
What you're viewing is recognized as the most densely populated location to have ever existed. It spans just 6.4 acres, which is equivalent to 13 Starbucks coffee shops located in the Empire State Building. And while a huge coffee shop like this one can host, say, 1,000 guests, this place somehow managed to have around 33,000 people squeezed in. Some estimates suggest that the actual number could have soared to 50,000 at some point. This is Kowloon walled city. The city is relatively young, settled in 1898, but its history goes back nearly 1,000 years to the Song dynasty. Originally a modest fortification, it remained largely unchanged until renovations in 1847 added defensive walls, leading to its revival a half-century later. But back then, the area was sparsely populated rather than crowded. To really understand just how packed this area got by the mid-20th century, let's compare it to some others. Take the East Village in New York City, for example. It has a little park at its center, but mostly it's filled with a mix of historic homes and newer apartment buildings. As of 2010, it was home to over 44,000 people, making it way more crowded than the rest of New York City, which is saying a lot, since New York City is the most densely populated city in the US. By most standards, it's pretty busy. But then you look at Kowloon walled city, and it's a whole different ballgame. If all the land there could be split proportionally between the residents, that would be somewhere around 5.5 to 8.5 square feet per person, if we count land only, while science claims people need 200 to 400 square feet at home just to feel good. So, why was everything crammed together like that? Well, it comes down to Kowloon walled city's unique status. It was never officially part of the rest of Hong Kong. What started as a small Chinese military outpost became more significant when a larger fort was built nearby, coinciding with the rise of Canton Harbor. After the fall of the Qing dynasty, this site transformed into a tourist destination, eventually becoming home to around 400 squatters. However, in the 1930s, the Hong Kong authorities intervened, relocating the inhabitants and demolishing the dilapidated structures. The 1940s and 50s were pretty rough times for folks in Kowloon. And while the residents were somewhat accustomed to different countries vying for control over their land, they were definitely caught off guard by natural disasters. In January 1950, a massive fire broke out that wiped over 2,500 huts, leaving almost 3,500 families, which is about 17,000 people without homes. This disaster really underscored the need for better fire safety measures, especially in the squatter areas made mainly of wood. The problem didn't end there. Due to the lack of control from both the Chinese and British authorities, except for a handful of operations conducted by the Hong Kong police, the walled city became a refuge for illegal activities. It was not until a trial in 1959, which took place within the walled city's boundaries, that the Hong Kong government was officially recognized as having jurisdiction there. By that time, however, organized crime groups known as triads had already established dominance over the area. Starting in the 1950s, triad factions such as the 14K and Sun Yee-un took control of all the criminal dens within the walled city. The environment became so dangerous that police would only enter in large numbers. It wasn't until 1973 and 1974 when over 3,500 police operations led to more than 2,500 arrests and the confiscation of illegal produce that the influence of the triads began to diminish. Only a decade later, the local police chief announced that the crime rate in the walled city was now under control. And even though crime dropped, the walled city still became known for having a surprising number of unlicensed doctors and dentists who could work there without fear of getting into trouble. That was a win-win. Many working-class people couldn't afford licensed dentists somewhere in Hong Kong, so they would go to Kowloon to receive affordable health care. You get it now. What can attract people in such a seedy place? Right, it's zero oversight. And zero oversight means that anyone could start their business here, no matter how shady it was. However, there were some totally normal entrepreneurs. For example, noodle makers. Despite all the dangers, the population of the city kept growing. But how can you create more houses if your territory is very limited? Simple. Think vertically, not horizontally. So, local developers started stacking more and more stories, as if those were Lego bricks you could easily add on top of your tower. This led to a crazy population boom, making the city feel like a little world of its own, with over 33,000 people being crammed into 300 buildings on just about 7 acres. By the late 70s and early 80s, the city hit its peak size. But that came with some quirks. However, there were limits on how tall buildings could go. Those could not exceed 13 to 14 stories, and it was because of planes flying into Kai Tak Airport. Yeah, living close to the airport meant residents had to deal with a lot of noise. Water was provided through 8 municipal pipes, although there were options for wells too. Some streets barely saw any natural light thanks to the way buildings were packed in, and fluorescent lights were the go-to for illumination down below. It was nighttime all the time in there. So, the city buildings were pretty tall, yet the city had merely 2 elevators for its entirety. At the base of various skyscrapers, both shared and private mailboxes were affixed to the walls. Frequently, this left the postman with no choice but to ascend on foot. Even several floors high, the tangled network of paths persisted, intricate passages that wound their way into the city's core through a web of bridges and staircases. But let's say you live in such a place and want to have a walk or just a bit of fresh air. What do? In such cramped conditions, rooftops will serve you 1,000 purposes. They can be a space for physical activities and a kid's playground, but they can also be used as venues for pigeon racing, with residents making their guess concerning which pigeon comes first. And it's illegal for sure. Such rooftops can pose certain risks because of the narrow spaces between the buildings. But locals use them also as landfills. The absence of efficient garbage collection led to some residents to transport their larger waste items up to the roof. Consequently, many rooftops became crowded with abandoned mattresses, damaged furniture, and appliances. Hey, I get the feeling that I'm talking about something that actually exists. Sorry for that, I totally forgot to mention the most important thing. This city ceased its existence back in the 1990s. What happened? Long story short, both Chinese and British authorities grew increasingly weary of the chaos unfolding in the city. Control was difficult, if not impossible. Criminals kept proliferating and the area was in disarray. Consequently, officials from both countries chipped in and allocated approximately $350 million in compensation for the locals, who had been kicked out of that area as the city was demolished. Kowloon exists today, but not as the infamous walled city. It's now an urban area in Hong Kong, which is located in a completely different place. It just has the same name. As for the area that used to be Kowloon, there's now a park known as Kowloon Walled City Park. Architects and thinkers still look back at Kowloon as a prime example of the organic megastructure concept from the 60s, which envisions cities as flexible networks that grow and change with their residents. Almost forgot. If you're looking to catch a glimpse of the real deal, you should watch Crime Story, starring Jackie Chan, as some scenes were filmed there.
So hey, let's talk. What's your biggest fear? If it's flying or stray dogs, you might not have any particular wild phobias. But how do you feel when you see something truly huge, like a giant skyscraper? If those colossal objects give you the creeps, you might have megalophobia. And now it makes sense why a megalodon is named for its size. Let's check out some of the biggest things humans have built. No need to worry, it's just all images on a screen. Right now, you're looking at the world's largest wind turbine, which can produce a whopping 20 megawatts of power. Mingyang Smart Energy recently unveiled this big boy in Hainan, China, in September 2024. The previous record holder from 2023 produced only 18 megawatts. Well, if electrical technical isn't your thing, let me break it down for you. 1 megawatt, or 1 million watts, can power about 1,000 homes. So this turbine can supply energy for around 20,000 homes, basically a small town. It has a massive rotor, nearly 1,000 feet across, and sweeps an area larger than 12 NFL football fields. Mingyang is known for building the largest offshore turbines, and this one can produce a staggering 80 million kilowatt-hours annually, enough for 96,000 homes. Plus, it's built to survive tough weather, withstanding level 17 typhoons at wind speeds of over 175 miles per hour. And guess what? Mingyang is working on an even larger turbine that'll crank out 22 megawatts and is set to be installed next year. But this time, it's got to cover 813,000 square feet. Now, if you've ever ordered something on Amazon that's from overseas or picked up some mass market clothing, you've probably relied on cargo ships. Most of those goods come by sea since it's way cheaper than air shipping. Just take a look at cargo ships with containers. They look like a bunch of Lego bricks stacked up. Each of those containers is based on a standard 20-foot intermodal container, which is basically a metal box that can easily switch between ships, trains, and trucks. We call these containers TEUs. To give you an idea of just how much they can carry, a fully loaded evergreen ship can hold up to 742 million t-shirts. That means one ship could outfit every American with at least 2 shirts. Wow. Evergreen can fit 20,124 TEUs, but it's far from being the ship with the most capacity. Check out MSC Irina, the largest container ship in the world that can hold 24,346 TEUs. Registered under the Liberian flag, it stretches an impressive 1,300 feet long and 200 feet wide. While it shares similar dimensions to other ships, it has the highest capacity because it can stack those TEUs up to 26 layers deep. It surpasses the previous record holder, the OOCL Spain, by more than 150 TEUs. Now, speaking of ships, have you ever thought about how massive cruise ships can be? Let me introduce you to the Icon of the Seas, which weighs a staggering 248,663 gross tons. Now, to put that in perspective, it's like combining 10 Statues of Liberty. This gigantic vessel stretches around 1,200 feet, so walking from one end to the other would take you roughly 5 minutes. The Icon of the Seas was officially named on January 23, 2024, and it can host 7,600 passengers along with 2,350 crew members spread across 20 decks. It's powered by 6 strong engines, generating a whopping 67.5 megawatts of energy to keep everything running like a well-oiled machine. And when it comes to cruising, it glides through the waves at a speed of 22 knots, which is a nautical mile per hour, just a bit longer than a regular mile. Hey, how long do you think the longest bike is? Is it as long as a standard tandem bike, a truck, or maybe the length of 8 African elephants and 1 baby elephant standing in a row? The world's longest bike measures 180 feet 11 inches. That's roughly as long as 12 average cars parked end-to-end. Built in the country of bikes, the Netherlands, this impressive ride was crafted to meet Guinness World Records criteria for a functional bike, complete with 2 wheels, pedals, and handlebars. On June 3, 2023, they set the record for the longest tandem bike before tweaking it to aim for the overall longest bike title. Finally, on April 30, 2024, 2 riders, 1 steering, 1 pedaling, traveled 328 feet to snag that world record. The Autotram Extra Grand is the largest bus in the world, measuring around 101 feet. This giant can comfortably carry up to 256 passengers. Not only is it the biggest, but it's also super efficient when it comes to performance and sustainability. The Autotram features 4 guided axles, 3 of which are controlled by an electro-hydraulic system. This setup lets it steer forward and backward just like a regular bus, while smart computer controls ensure that each section moves in sync, almost like train cars linked together. It's so efficient that drivers don't even need a special license to operate the Autotram. Sounds like a dream, huh? Well, sorry to break your pink glasses, but this guy was never put into service. The company that built it went bankrupt in 2013, so this bus never had a chance to give a ride to people out there. But there's something that measures the same 100 feet yet is operational and can give you a lift. Meet the American Dream, the super limo that's now officially the longest car in the world. Originally built in 1986 by car customizer J. Orberg, it started off at 60 feet long, while most cars are about 14 feet long. But Orberg wasn't done yet. He later extended it to break the 100-foot mark and snagged a spot in the Guinness World Records as the longest car around. Now, back in its heyday, the American Dream made some flashy appearances in movies, but eventually it ended up parked in a warehouse in New Jersey when maintenance became too much to handle. Renting it was just too complicated and pricey, especially when it was still just 60 feet long. Things turned around when Michael Manning, the owner of a technical teaching museum in New York, spotted the rusty old limo with broken windows and fell in love with it. Although it was in pretty rough shape, he wanted to save it. But when the museum's lease ended, money got tight and Manning decided to list the car on eBay. After it was bought in 2019, the limousine got a makeover. Now it isn't just big, it's got a helipad, a swimming pool with a diving board, a putting green, and can fit over 75 people. Now, there's nothing much that beats the thrill of catching a close game surrounded by over 100,000 fellow fans cheering their hearts out. The biggest stadiums on the planet are mostly in the US, but the biggest one is not there, and even if you wanted to visit it one day, you'd have a hard time doing it. Frankly, it's next to impossible, because it's situated in probably the most closed country in the world. All you need to know here is that the stadium is massive, with a seating capacity of 150,000 seats. But there's something just as massive located in India. The Narendra Modi Stadium, formerly known as Motera Stadium, is located in Ahmedabad. This ginormous cricket stadium holds over 132 fans, making it the second largest in the world. Finally, we've got an enormous vacuum chamber that's probably bigger than your entire house. So, what's a vacuum chamber exactly? Well, think of it like a supersized vacuum cleaner designed to suck out all the unwanted gases. It's a sturdy enclosure where air and other gases are removed using a vacuum pump, creating a low-pressure atmosphere inside, what we call a vacuum. This kind of environment is perfect for researchers who want to conduct experiments or test equipment that need to function in space. The world's largest vacuum chamber can be found at the Space Power Facility at a NASA research center in Ohio. It's a massive space that measures 100 feet across and reaches an impressive height of 122 feet. Sandy Island is a creepy landmass that appeared on world maps for nearly 200 years before vanishing into thin air. Located in the South Pacific between Australia and New Caledonia, this phantom island was first documented by explorers in the 18th century and continued to pop up on maps and even scientific surveys. But when a research ship sailed through its supposed coordinates in 2012, they found nothing but open water. They even measured the ocean depth at this spot, and it was always more than 4,000 feet deep, so there was no chance of a big piece of land could be hiding under the water. To make things even weirder, when you look up its exact coordinates on Google Earth, you'll still see a faint outline of what looks like a long, thin island, but with no landmass in sight. Theories about its disappearance talk about possible cartography errors, but the mystery of how a whole island fooled the world for centuries is still unsolved. Now, speaking of mysterious islands, let's dive into the enigma of Hashima Island. Located off the coast of Nagasaki, Japan, this small island was once a bustling coal mining facility, thriving with workers and families. But as the demand for coal declined, the island was abandoned in the 1970s, leaving behind a haunting ghost town. Today, Hashima stands eerily silent, with crumbling concrete buildings and overgrown vegetation. And if you are brave enough, you can do a virtual tour using Google Earth. But there are other places where digital maps won't let you see much, like the Ward Islands in Australia. If you search for its coordinates, you'll notice a bunch of blackout spots near the coast. This has led to all sorts of wild speculation online, sparking curiosity about what might be hidden beneath the surface. I mean, is it just a glitch? Or could there really be some unusual wildlife down there? Well, we still don't have concrete answers for these obscured areas, but it is worth mentioning that this region is part of a wilderness protection area. This place is an important zone for the Australian sea lion and the New Zealand fur seal, for example. So, these blackout spots could be just part of a plan to keep everything private and protected out there. From creepy islands to abandoned places, if you ever find yourself driving through Rio de Janeiro, you might catch a glimpse of something unsettling: a group of creepy Santas, faded candy canes, and rusty slides surrounded by palm trees and dense greenery. This is Parque Aba Noel, an eerie, abandoned Christmas-themed amusement park in Brazil. The park's creator had big dreams, thinking it would become a massive, eclectic attraction with different themed areas. We're talking about a space the size of 460 football fields. Work started in 2000, but the place shut down a few years later after the creator tragically passed away in a car accident just meters from the park's entrance. Today, the attractions are slowly being taken over by rust. This totally feels like something out of a sci-fi movie, but those multicolored rings are actually right here on Earth, in Yellowstone National Park to be exact. At 370 feet in diameter, it is the largest hot spring in the United States and the third largest in the world. When you see it from above, the different colors come from various types of bacteria that act like real-life thermographic filters. Each type of bacteria thrives at different temperatures, and their colors reflect the heat levels in different parts of the spring. Our next stop is in Italy, where you can find the Villa de Vecchi, also known as the Red House or the Ghost Mansion. For every ghost mansion, there's an urban legend behind it. Now, while nothing we're about to say is confirmed, the tale is still pretty interesting and downright bizarre. Built in the mid-19th century by Count Felix de Vecchi, this once grand summer residence quickly became the site of tragedy. The Count's wife passed away under mysterious circumstances, and his daughter disappeared, never to be seen again. Devastated, the Count is said to have spent his remaining days searching for answers. Over the years, the mansion fell into ruin, with local legends adding to its haunted reputation. Some claim to hear strange noises or see ghostly figures, while others whisper about unusual rituals that might have taken place there. Though crumbling and overgrown, Villa de Vecchi remains popular for those intrigued by its eerie history. While we've explored eerie and abandoned human-made structures, let's take a look at a place where nature's forces left their own massive mark: the meteor crater in Arizona. The site was formed in an instant about 50,000 years ago, when a large iron-nickel meteorite slammed into Earth. Measuring just under a mile wide and 560 feet deep, the crater is one of the best-preserved impact sites in the world. Standing at its edge, you can almost picture the incredible force of the impact, wiping out everything around it. Today, the meteor crater is a fascinating geological landmark, drawing in scientists and curious visitors. From a Google Earth point of view, this area in Niger looks creepy, and what seems to be clusters of glass domes dotting the landscape, almost like an interplanetary colony. But in reality, it's kind of an illusion. Those domes are actually small semicircular pits, and they're part of the Just Dig It project. Can you dig it? These pits, known as water buns or earth smiles, are dug to capture rainwater and restore dry, degraded land. It's a simple but genius method that helps bring life back to areas suffering from desertification. By trapping water, these buns allow vegetation to grow again, cooling the land and reviving ecosystems. Now, you have probably heard of the famous Nazca lines in Peru, right? We're talking about those massive ancient geoglyphs carved into the desert, which have shapes like a spider, a monkey, and a hummingbird. Well, recently, something similar popped up, and it's got the internet buzzing. This new figure, located at the top of a mountain, looks a lot like a wild boar. While it's super cool to find a potential new geoglyph, the lack of solid info and the not-so-sharp edges make us think it's just a natural formation. It's still pretty intriguing, though. But if you head down south to Chile, that's where you'll actually find a real geoglyph. We're talking about the Atacama Giant, which is around 390 feet tall. What looks like a funny drawing seems to represent some sort of spiritual figure or deity. There's no solid proof of what it actually means, but experts believe this design might have worked as an early astronomical calendar. The points on the top and sides of the head are said to indicate the seasons based on how they align with the moon. Meanwhile, you might also find some mysterious shipwrecks while exploring Google Earth, like the MV Plassey in Ireland. This ship met its tragic fate back in 1960 when a heavy storm and strong winds blew it ashore at Finnis Rock, tearing a hole in the vessel's bottom. Water started rushing in from underneath. After some shouting and running in all directions, the crew managed to get out of the ship. Today, the vessel's remains are still at Finnis Rock and have become a popular attraction. You can still see its hull, which keeps falling apart over time, making the whole scene even creepier. And we've also got something interesting involving the Titanic. Now, it's true that the ship is really 13,000 feet underwater, so you actually can't see it with satellite cameras. But if you type these coordinates into Google Earth, you'll find the spot of the Titanic accident. It's not that creepy of a place. I mean, it's really just a huge expanse of blue. But still, it's pretty interesting to get the big picture of how they seem so far from everything on that tragic night when the ship went down.
When you mention your plans to travel to Tristan da Cunha, the chances are your friends won't even know where this remote island is located. No wonder. Tristan da Cunha is considered the most remote inhabited archipelago in the world, with the nearest populated land, St. Helena, around 1,500 miles away. There are only 229 people living on Tristan da Cunha now. In such a close-knit community, everyone is someone's cousin, uncle, or maybe just a friend, but everyone knows each other for sure. There are as few as 10 last names on the island, representing just 10 families. Getting there is quite an adventure. There are no airports on the island, which means your journey will be primarily by sea. Typically, it requires a days-long voyage from South Africa. Only 3 ships regularly service the island, with fewer than a dozen trips each year. Some cruise lines may include it in their itineraries, but travel arrangements must be made well in advance, due to limited berths available on the ship from Cape Town. And you'll also need landing permission. While Tristan doesn't have traditional hotels, there are several guest houses, and you might also have the chance to stay with a local family. They will provide you with a place to sleep, 3 meals a day, and laundry services. 88% of what you pay goes directly to the island family, and only 12% is tax. By the way, the accommodation is surprisingly affordable. It was around £65 for a full board in 2024. Yep, they do use sterling, being a part of overseas British territory. But there's also this local currency called St. Helena Pound, used at parity with sterlings. By the way, it's only been around 80 years since the island started using actual money. In 1942, the naval station began paying cash wages, and it helped Tristan Islanders to move from a barter economy to a cash-based system, and allowed them the novelty of making their first cash purchases. Just a heads up, pack everything you might need before you go, as you definitely won't come across Walmart there. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's a supermarket and all, but it's just not the way you're used to, with endless shelves displaying endless oversized mayo jars. Tristan's Island Store, often referred to as the supermarket, lacks plate glass windows and flashy advertisements, and let's be honest, it looks like an abandoned barn from the outside. Still, it plays a crucial role in providing essential goods to complement locally produced foods and woolens. If a resident wants to buy something, they must place orders months in advance for items that arrive with incoming ships. The store operates Monday through Friday. Today, the islanders continue to cultivate their own crops and raise livestock. The supermarket has become a vital source for other essentials like flour, sugar, and a variety of groceries including frozen bread and products typical of the UK or South African supermarkets. And even though the island's economy relies heavily on fishing, especially rock lobsters, islanders are largely self-sufficient. Let's move to another destination that's super hard to reach, but this time it's a level up in difficulty. I'm talking about the notorious Hypoxia City, the place with the smallest amount of oxygen on the planet. Sure thing, it's a nickname. The real name is La Rinconada. This place is located in Peru. Getting there means climbing over 16,000 feet up into the mountains. And what did you expect from the highest city on Earth? Despite its hard-to-reach location, it houses way more people than Tristan da Cunha, between 30,000 and 50,000. And while the island in the middle of nowhere looks idyllic, the Peruvian city of La Rinconada has very different looks. The urban layout features predominantly low-rise residences, where essential services are limited. La Rinconada is without a reliable supply of running water and lacks a sewage system. The community does not have a waste collection service, which forces residents to either burn or bury their garbage. Moreover, up until the early 2000s, La Rinconada did not have access to electricity. Most things, including the most essential foods, must be brought here from outside. Despite originally being a miner city, right now it has a wider range of activities to make your living. Some people are busy with trading, food, clothes, you name it. Others provide services, and some people even open public restrooms. Architectural-wise, La Rinconada has very little to offer. The pattern is quite predictable. Huts made from corrugated metal that are unstable and rusting. The choice of materials is dictated by practicality. These metal sheets are the lightest and easiest for miners to transport to the glacier. Unfortunately, the homes lack proper insulation, leaving residents shivering in the cold even though they have access to wool from local sheep, which is an excellent insulator. Sturdier rock homes exist but are rare, typically inhabited by wealthier miners. While the architecture might not be particularly captivating, the vistas certainly are. In nearly every spot in La Rinconada, a glance upward reveals La Bella Durmiente, or Sleeping Beauty, a massive glacier towering over the town. Getting to La Rinconada is very hard. First, you'll need to fly into Alejandro Velasco Astete International Airport in Cusco, Peru. Once you're in Cusco, you can catch a train or a bus to Puno, which is right by Lake Titicaca. Here's where it gets a bit tricky. The only way to really get up to La Rinconada is by hitchhiking or finding a ride into the mountains. There might be some buses, but they don't run on a set schedule. If you're up for it, you can rent a car, but be warned, the roads can be pretty rough and tricky to navigate. So a little extra caution goes a long way on this adventure. Unlike Tristan da Cunha, where they adopted cashback in the 1940s, La Rinconada doesn't rely much on it. The economy of this place is based mainly on gold mines. The mines are unguarded, unregulated, and often dangerous. Miners work for 30 days under a cachorreo system, where on the 31st day, they're allowed to take as much ore from the mine as they can carry as a form of payment. La Rinconada has no bank, but it has many storefront fund transfer agencies, which miners use to wire money to their families. Still, they never know how much they're gonna send. Our next destination is Svalbard, a place that might seem unwelcoming due to its climate. But locals embrace everyone with open arms. No visa is required if you want to visit or even work there. Located near the top of the world, Svalbard offers a unique and remote charm. The capital, Longyearbyen, is home to a fascinatingly diverse community, with over 50 nationalities represented among its 2,400 residents. You might even spot a polar bear wandering into town on occasion. The living space is compact. There's just one grocery store, and the streets are numbered instead of named, adding to the town's distinctive feel. Longyearbyen also boasts a university center with around 300 students. Interestingly, every student must learn to use firearms for safety in the surrounding wilderness. Originally, it was founded as a mining town, just like La Rinconada, but the focus has shifted mainly to tourism. However, a quirky tradition remains from its mining days. Visitors and residents alike take off their shoes when entering hotels and restaurants, a practice born out of the need to keep coal dust at bay. The last destination for today is Palmerston Island, a remote coral atoll in the Cook Islands, located about 290 miles northwest of Rarotonga. Famous traveler James Cook visited it on June 16, 1774, and the place was uninhabited at the time, despite ancient graves found there. Today, the island supports a small population of just 25 residents, primarily descendants of 19th century English sailor William Marsters. Marsters arrived in 1863 with 2 Polynesian wives and later added a third. He fathered 23 children. Fishing is the mainstay of the local economy, resembling subsistence living due to the island's isolation. Modern amenities and communication services are available. Although there's no airport, cargo ships visit periodically. Tunnels, metro, underground systems, and even secret passageways to the houses of the rich and famous. Why else do we need tunnels, you may wonder? To hide. Many cities have underground tunnels and even underground doppelgangers. Now let's make it clear. Those passages are normally not connected, contrary to the popular rumor claiming that it was possible to get from Scotland to Turkey using underground passageways built around 5,000 years ago. I mean, it sounds insane even today. Imagine building it back in the day. These tunnels have an official name, the Erdstall Tunnels, and they were most likely built in the Middle Ages. However, we still don't have the exact information about the date. The highest concentration of those tunnels are in Bavaria, Germany, but there are many of them in Great Britain and France too. Erdstall tunnels, a unique type of earthen passage found globally, are characterized by their narrow, oval-shaped corridors and tight choke points, known as schlups, or slip-outs. Despite speculation, their purpose remains a mystery. However, some of those tunnels have fireplaces and even vents, which might mean those were used primarily for shelter. Dating back to the Middle Ages, possibly as early as the 12th century, Erdstall tunnels lack archaeological signs and historical records. So it's not a surprise that there are many rumors about their use. Some scientists are sure those were storage spaces, though their narrowness makes this impractical. Another idea is that they provided hiding spots for farmers during tribal raids. However, their single entry point raises doubts about their effectiveness in evading threats. Now, if you're feeling like Indiana Jones and want to venture into those tunnels, you're in luck. A few structures, like the Erdstall Radkobluken in Austria, welcome visitors to explore these enigmatic structures. Most of them are closed to the public eye, though. The origins of Erdstall tunnels remain largely unknown, just like their real functions. And if you think, hey, it's the 21st century here, we can study pretty much everything, well, you're wrong. What makes these tunnels hard to study are the tight confines. Traditional surveying methods often prove inadequate in such spaces. To solve this problem, scientists use a handheld device that integrates an RGB camera, a gyroscope, and high-resolution depth sensors, allowing them to capture intricate details of the tunnels. They also use modern techniques like 3D surveying in hopes of uncovering the true origins and purposes of those tunnels. One hypothesis even suggests they may have been poorly conceived dwellings, abandoned when their inadequacies became apparent. Still, not everyone quite agrees with this idea. Other theories suggest they served spiritual purposes, while the most intriguing idea speculates that those tunnels may be remnants of extraterrestrial civilizations. Experts believe they may have been used for practical matters, such as granaries or hiding spots from looters. As we don't have exact info on who built it and when, it may be pretty much anyone, even a sloth. Nope, I'm not a lunatic. Sloths can build giant tunnels. Check this out. In 2009, a farmer in southern Brazil was driving his tractor through a cornfield when it suddenly sank into the ground. He quickly discovered he had broken through the top of an underground tunnel. When researchers came to investigate, they found a tunnel around 6.5 feet high and the same 6.5 feet wide, extending about 50 feet long right beneath the farmer's house. When they looked closer, they instantly saw deep claw marks on the walls. That was the proof the tunnel wasn't human-made. So that thing the farmer uncovered was a megafauna paleo-burrow, a prehistoric tunnel dug by ancient creatures like giant ground sloths or giant armadillos from over 10,000 years ago. I know, it's hard to imagine those beasts, but let me help you. Take a hamster. Now, increase it to the size of an elephant. Don't forget, this 13-foot-tall hamster could also walk on 2 legs. During their time, around 15 million to 10,000 years ago, many species of sloths and giant armadillos roamed the Americas, some even digging similar tunnels. Today, many of these tunnels are filled with sediment, though some remain clear, similar to the one the farmer discovered. This 2009 find sparked significant interest, leading to the discovery of over 1,500 paleo-burrows across southern Brazil, making it the area with the highest concentration of such sites worldwide. But no one knows exactly why there are so many of them in southern Brazil. While some paleo-burrows exist throughout South America, none have been found in North America, which is weird since those huge sloths roamed the entire continent. The exact purpose of these large tunnels remains a mystery, but scientists believe they may have served as nursing spaces, temperature regulation, or hibernation areas. Tunnels likely developed over centuries as successive generations of sloths and armadillos expanded them. Now, let's take a look at Fougous. No, not the Japanese fatal delicacy, and no, not a town in New Guinea. To see them, we gotta travel to the UK. So Fougous are underground structures too, but they don't look exactly like tunnels. They are dry stone structures. They look as if a cave had been decorated with stones from the inside. There are only around 15 of them found so far, and most of them are located in Cornwall. According to the estimates, those tunnels were built about 2,400 years ago, and they're still in pristine condition, which is truly fascinating. I mean, back in the day, people had no cool machinery whatsoever, yet their structures still last. And if you dare to buy an apartment today, well, chances are you won't be too happy about the quality. Going back to our Fougous, there's nothing extraordinary about their supposed purpose. They could be used for spiritual purposes, as a place to hide, or a food storage. The latest application, though, is a bit weird. I guess it's not a secret for anyone that England is famous for its excessive humidity. And if you want to store your food properly, you gotta avoid the humidity at all costs. Otherwise, say welcome to mold and fungi. But ancient people weren't dull-witted at all, or they wouldn't have survived, and you and I wouldn't be around now. So they might have adapted those Fougous to store just some products, those that already had natural molds in them, assisting in the preservation of perishable food, like milk, butter, and cheese. But hey, those are just speculations. The true reason why they were built remains unknown. What makes Fougous unique is that they are intentionally built tunnels, not just excavated mines like those in Wales. They were crafted by digging deep trenches, lining them with stone slabs, covering them with capstones, and then filling over them, all of which took significant time and effort. Still, no matter how hard those were to construct, cities around the globe are often built over intricate tunnel systems, each unique to its location. For instance, Paris is famous for its extensive underground quarries, which were abandoned years ago, but still pose a risk of collapse in certain areas above. London boasts one of the largest tunnel networks in the world, including many that were specifically created for military purposes. In New York City, there are rumors of secret tunnels, while Los Angeles has old tunnels from the Prohibition era used for speakeasies. Many other cities also have their share of enigmatic tunnels, and surprisingly, Florida is no exception. It happened in the year 2011 in Ybor City. Near a former post office, flooding uncovered something weird, a section of an unknown structure. Back then, people didn't pay much attention to that, so it took another 7 years to discover something truly fascinating. This historic neighborhood was founded in the 1880s, but it remained unknown until 2018 that it also has a hidden tunnel network. We only learned of it because of renovation work. The exact purpose, of course, is unknown, but most scientists are pretty sure that they serve to connect to early gaming spots and the port of Tampa. Figuring out how extensive the tunnel network is tricky. In 2018, a historic home in Seminole Heights revealed locked doors leading to tunnels from the 1920s. One local even said he traveled through a tunnel for 20 minutes. Rumors suggest some tunnels connect to the Hillsborough River and Ybor City. Research is ongoing, but no new info has emerged yet.
If you're looking for the coolest accommodation in Paris, you may consider an apartment inside the Eiffel Tower. When Gustave Eiffel was designing his most famous construction, he added a private apartment for himself right at the top. It's rather spacious, especially for Paris, where people often live in apartments 10 times smaller. It had a workshop, living space, a dining room, a kitchen, a bathroom, and piano. But there was no bedroom, so it's likely that no one ever slept there. No one lives there now, except for the mannequins of Eiffel himself, his daughter, and one of Thomas Edison. Members of the scientific community chosen by Eiffel and other notable guests were allowed to visit the property, and Edison was one of the chosen ones. Now, across the pond, the New York Public Library also hosts secret apartments for the staff. These apartments used to be a normal thing in different library buildings across the city, but now there are only 13 left out of 30. One superintendent lived in the library on 42nd Street for many years, and his own daughter was even born inside that building. The apartments came in different sizes, and some had up to 8 rooms. By 2006, the last resident custodian retired, and now these apartments are used for other library needs. It's known as the tallest building in the world, but Burj Khalifa is actually not one, but several constructions connected into one. It has a Y-shaped plan, and if you look at it from above, it's scary. I mean, it resembles a spider lily. It's uber flexible and can bend a little bit when there are strong winds or even earthquakes, so it stands safe and strong. Burj Khalifa has over 24,000 windows, and it takes a crew of 36 people around 3 months to clean them all. There's a crypt beneath the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., and visitors pass through it every day. The first architect of this famous landmark designed it as a grand vestibule, which means just a big entrance hall. Several years later, plans changed, and the room was supposed to become the final resting place for George Washington and his wife Martha. She agreed to it, and architects changed the Capitol plans to add a tomb below the famous rotunda. They also planned to put a statue of Washington on top, and there was going to be a 10-foot hole in the ceiling so people could look down and see his tomb from the rotunda. But Congress couldn't agree on all the details of this memorial, and the tomb remained empty. Years later, workers closed the big hole in the floor, which was meant to give light to the tomb because cold air was leaking into the rotunda. At some point, the crypt was used for bicycle parking. Today, it has statues of famous people from the 13 original colonies, and George Washington and his wife are buried out back. No, actually, they're in Mount Vernon. There's a hidden clock and a calendar in St. Peter's Square in the Vatican. The 83-foot obelisk works like a giant sundial, using its shadow to show the time and even mark special days like the solstices. When the sun is at its highest point in the sky, called solar noon, the shadow of the obelisk falls on a line of stones on the ground. On the winter solstice, the shadow reaches its farthest point. On the summer solstice, the shadow is much shorter. There are also 5 other special markers that show when the sun enters different zodiac signs. The long, thin granite line running from the obelisk toward the Pope's window shows exactly when it's noon. British seaside Brighton stands on top of a secret network of underground tunnels, with Victorian sewer systems and a hidden road. They say the tunnels were built below the royal pavilion, so that King George IV could go on, secret dates. History experts say it's not true. and the king actually used tunnels to keep his servants out of sight when they moved between the pavilion and the stables. The 30 miles of tunnels are now over 150 years old, and you can see some of them with an organized tour. But some parts of them are still in use. One tunnel serves as an emergency relief valve for heavy rain. Another tunnel has a shooting range inside. The bascule chambers inside the Tower Bridge are one of the coolest hidden spaces in London. These spacious rooms were built as an operational center to let the bridge's huge counterweights move for the bridge to open. They were the final stage in the construction of the bridge. Now, if you're lucky, you can see these chambers on a special behind-the-scenes tour of the bridge. You'd have to descend 115 steps below water level until you get into the cold and damp space with rumbling overhead. Sometimes they organize concerts here, and the acoustics are just perfect. In the early 1930s, there was a real race in New York to construct the tallest building. Once 40 Wall Street was finished, it won the title. But then, the architect of the Chrysler Building added a spire to its top, and it became the new champion. The spire was waiting all this time inside the top of the building. Workers had to carefully lift each section of it and assemble it on top. They used nearly 4 million bricks to finish the whole building and laid them all out by hand. There were also some elements from Chrysler's automotive empire, like hubcaps, fenders, and radiator caps. There was a private apartment and office on the top of the building for the founder of the Chrysler Corporation. They say he liked to brag he had the highest toilet in Manhattan. I'm sure he was flush with pride. The Capitol Records Building in Los Angeles has been sending secret messages since it opened, and you need to know Morse code to understand them. That secret message is Hollywood. The light has been sending the same message since the opening in 1956, but it has changed a couple of times. In 1992, to celebrate Capitol Records' 50th anniversary, it flashed Capitol 50. Then, before Katy Perry's album release in 2013, the message was also changed, but hardly anyone noticed the difference. One more fun fact about the building: it was the first circular office building in the world. Producer Samuel Lionel Roxy Rothafel designed a hidden apartment for himself in the Radio City Music Hall in New York City. He chose for the apartment, now called the Roxy Suite, to be decorated in the Art Deco style. It has 20-foot-high ceilings covered in gold leaf and walls with floor-to-ceiling plush drapes. Some of the most famous guests of the apartment were Judy Garland, Walt Disney, and Samuel Goldwyn. Today, it only opens for special occasions and looks exactly the same as it did in 1936. You might be able to rent it out for a private event, but they say the prices are very high. Grand Central Station in New York has a great hidden activity for travelers. There are tennis courts in a secret space named the Annex. This area used to be a recording studio. Now the location is known as the Vanderbilt Tennis Club, and you can visit it and play tennis there. The U.S. Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. has a secret sports facility where clerks, off-duty police officers, and other Supreme Court employees can play basketball. This court, the basketball court, is located on the top 5th floor of the building and goes under the nickname the highest court in the land. There's a fun sign next to it saying, "Playing basketball and weightlifting are prohibited while the court is in session." Well, we wouldn't want to tempt the justices to, drop everything they're doing to play a game of horse, but I think that would be fun. Those fluffy cumulus clouds you see in the sky weigh as much as a Boeing 747 or 100 elephants. Hey, if you don't believe me, let's do the math. Scientists figured out that the density of water inside a cumulus cloud is around 0.5 gram per cubic meter. Now, clouds come in all sizes, but an average cloud of this type is shaped somewhat like a cube and has a volume of 1 billion cubic meters. When you multiply it by density, you get an impressive result of slightly over 1 million pounds. And in case you were wondering, this giant stays afloat because its density is lower than that of the air surrounding it. Giraffes are 30 times more likely to get struck by lightning than you are. There were 5 official fatal cases involving giraffes and lightning between 1996 and 2010. But since their population worldwide is just around 140,000 during that period, the fatality rate is rather high per thousand of giraffes per year. Lightning bolts love tall objects, so giraffes are unfortunately an easy hit. But scientists think they might have learned to deal with it and seek shelter during a thunderstorm or move quickly to thickly vegetated areas. The oldest animals on Earth are glass sponges. They can live up to 15,000 years. Scientists found the oldest glass sponge in the Ross Sea, a part of Antarctica. In another part of the world, the East China Sea, scientists found the skeleton of a glass sponge that lived for about 11,000 years. These sponges might have been around during the last ice age. They lived their whole lives stuck to hard surfaces, filtering water to snack on bacteria and plankton. So, our Earth is spinning more slowly now, which means our days are getting a bit longer over time. Long ago, I wasn't around then, a day on Earth was only about 19 hours, but then it grew to 24, mostly because the moon's gravity pulls on Earth and slows it down. Different extreme things go on in nature that can change the speed of Earth's spin in the short term. An earthquake in Chile in 2010 may have made our day a little bit shorter, according to scientists. But since 2020, the days have been getting longer again. Now, scientists still can't decide if water is actually wet or not. Some of them say water isn't wet itself, but it can make other things wet when it sticks to them. Others think water is wet because it's a liquid and has moisture. Water can feel wet because it cools your skin as it evaporates. How wet something is depends on two forces: cohesive forces that keep water droplets together and adhesive forces that make water stick to things. Water doesn't stick well to waterproof fabrics, and they stay dry because cohesive forces are stronger in that case. Guess what? There is no map of the world that would be 100% accurate unless it's life-size. Our planet is round and paper is flat. Duh! Back in the 16th century, Gerardus Mercator designed a cylindrical map projection that is still used and named after him. This concept is good for navigation because the north is always up, but the top and bottom parts get stretched out. So Greenland looks 14 times larger than it really is, and Alaska is the size of Brazil. Around 4 billion years ago, Earth's atmosphere was very different from what we know and love. But volcanoes saved the day. Tons of them were erupting all over the place, spewing out carbon dioxide. This gas filled the sky and made up most of the atmosphere. Tiny early plants used that carbon dioxide to grow by photosynthesis and give out oxygen. One of the theories says that the steam from all the volcanoes cooled down and turned into water and gave us the oceans. It took about 2 billion years for enough oxygen to fill the air so that animals could live and breathe here. Now, if for some reason you ever decided to stack all the world's germs and bacteria on top of each other, they would stretch for 10 billion light-years. But you wouldn't even see this thread, because it would be about 75 times thinner than a human hair. If you wrap this long line of bacteria around our galaxy, the Milky Way, it would circle around it more than 20,000 times. Ooh, my brain! It turns out there's rust on the moon, and it may have traveled all the way from Earth to get there. Now, rust usually needs oxygen and water to form, and the moon has almost none of either. But when this celestial body passes through a part of space called Earth's magnetotail, oxygen from Earth can reach it with solar winds. This oxygen may have combined with tiny amounts of water and iron on the moon's surface to create rust. Now, even a tiny asteroid can knock our planet out of its orbit. But don't worry, you probably won't even notice any difference. The effect of an impact will depend on many things, like how strong the space rock is, how fast it's going, and what kind of ground it hits. Most of the time, when space rocks hit Earth, they break apart or turn to gas before they reach the ground. But big ones, like the one that wiped out the dinosaurs, can cause huge problems, like big waves, earthquakes, and even change the weather. The Earth isn't solid like a rock on the inside, but more like squishy clay because of the very high heat and pressure deep underground. This squishiness allows the mantle to move very slowly over millions of years, and that's why we get earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and the shifting of continents. During the last ice age, huge heavy glaciers sat on top of Earth's surface, pressing down on the squishy mantle underneath. This made the mantle sink a bit. When the ice melted, the mantle started pushing back up and the land began to rise again. Even today, in places like Canada, Greenland, and Scandinavia, the land is still rising because of this. Our planet is covered with cosmic dust. About 5,000 tons of it reach the surface of Earth every year. This interstellar substance is smaller than a grain of sand and often even thinner than a human hair. Scientists go all the way to the middle of Antarctica, where it barely snows, and the snow is super clean to spot those particles. Most of this dust comes from comets. If you're an introvert, Greenland is the ideal place for you. It is the least densely populated area in the world, with only 0.1 person per square mile. Wow, I've never actually seen a tenth of a person. Anyway, most of Greenland is covered in ice, so people live mainly along the west coast. Oh, and by the way, it's been inhabited for over 4,500 years, so it must not be that bad after all. Guess what? The ground you walk on is actually recycled. First, hot melted rock from magma comes to the surface and cools down to become solid rock. Then, thanks to tectonic forces, the rock gets pushed up to the surface. Over time, wind, rain, and other forces break pieces of the rock off. They get carried away and eventually settle down in layers. These layers get squished together, forming sedimentary rocks, like sandstone. Sometimes, if these sedimentary rocks get pushed deep under the Earth's surface, the heat and pressure cook them into a new type of rock called metamorphic rock. A long time ago, life on Earth might have been purple instead of green. A molecular biologist from the University of Maryland thinks that the very first microbes used a special molecule to capture sunlight that made them look purple. Today, plants are green because they use chlorophyll to absorb sunlight and turn it into energy. But before chlorophyll existed, retinal molecules did the same job. It soaked up green light from the sun and reflected red and purple light, which made the microbes look violet and like little tiny grapes. Really.
Thousands of years ago, a huge meteor weighing 2 million tons crashed into Earth at a speed of around 56,000 miles per hour. Sounds like a big deal, and it was. It actually created Lonar Lake in Maharashtra. When you see it from above, it might look like any other lake, but the sand there is magnetic, and it makes compasses go haywire. First off, it's a soda lake. Nah, it's not filled with Coke. It's just another name for an alkaline lake. The pH levels there vary from 9 to 12, whereas humans enjoy ranges from 6.5 to 8.5. So it's not really advisable to bathe there, not to mention to drink such water. There's a little round dip about 2,300 feet away from the main lake, which folks think was made by a piece of the main meteor. Near this lake, there's a Hanuman temple that has an idol carved from rock, and it's said to have some pretty strong magnetic vibes. Also, local farmers are draining water from Ambar Lake. Sometimes people refer to this lake as Chota Lonar, which means Little Lonar. This nearly perfect oval is one of only 2 natural craters in the world made entirely from basalt, a dark, finely textured volcanic rock. The water there is 7 times saltier than ocean water, and sometimes the lake can turn pink due to particular bacteria. Whenever you open up a tap to fill a glass of water, water goes from top to bottom because gravity, duh. It's hard to imagine it acting the other way around, but turns out there are many waterfalls that can defy gravity and go in the opposite direction. That's called a reverse waterfall, and it happens when super strong winds whip through a waterfall, pushing the water back up. It's especially common for those windy fall and winter months. You usually need winds of at least 46 miles per hour to see this cool trick in action. It's actually not as rare as one may think, and you can find these wild reverse waterfalls all over the globe, from Australia to India, Japan, the UK, and the US. In Australia, in areas like Sydney, the Central Coast, and Royal National Park, winds around 43 miles per hour have been known to turn waterfalls upside down. Yep, it's all about the wind going this fast. Please put aside all those weird myths about Australia being in the southern hemisphere, like the one about the water in the toilet flushing in the opposite direction. This is nothing but an urban myth. In India, near Mumbai, and in places like Sandan Valley and Amboli Hills, waterfalls get blown upward during the monsoon. And if you're ever in the Faroe Islands, you can witness this unique phenomenon happen regularly due to the region's geography and fierce winds from the North Atlantic. Magnetic Hill in Ladakh, India, is a fascinating spot, sitting at about 14,000 feet high, right along the Srinagar-Leh Highway, just 16 miles from Leh City. It's known for a quirky gravitational trick where parked cars mysteriously roll uphill when left in neutral, defying logic and catching the attention of visitors from all over. Locals have their own myths, viewing it as a path between heaven and earth. You'll want to stop by between June and September when the weather is just right and the optical illusion effect is at its peak, typically from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. In Brazil, there's this street called Rua do Amendoim that seems to defy the laws of physics, leaving many puzzled as they walk or drive down it. Locals affectionately call it Peanut Street, and there's never a shortage of parking spots. That's mainly because if a car is parked without the emergency brake, it starts to roll uphill all on its own, picking up speed as it goes. People have all sorts of wild theories about why this happens. Some say the hill is haunted, while others think there's a huge iron ore deposit beneath it pulling cars up like a magnet. But believe it or not, the truth is that this strange occurrence is just an optical illusion. The street looks steep, but it actually has a slight dip. So while it seems like cars are rolling uphill, they're really just going downhill. Still, that hasn't stopped folks from filming countless videos of this quirky sight. Located on the beautiful Black Sea coast, Ureki is a chill beach resort town known for its unique magnetic sands that are all about health and wellness. These sands have been getting attention for their healing powers since the 1800s, helping people tackle various health issues. Ureki's magnetic sand is packed with minerals like magnetite and quartz. It's got an unusual magnetic content of about 23%, making its magnetic field way stronger than that of regular sand. The Hessdalen Lights are mysterious glowing orbs seen in a 7-mile stretch of the Hessdalen Valley in central Norway. These lights have been popping up since at least the 1930s and can be spotted both day and night. They usually shine in bright white, yellow, or red and can hover, move quickly, or sway gently. Their appearances can last from a few seconds to over an hour. Though there were many sightings, especially between 1981 and 1984, the frequency has gone down to about 10 to 20 a year as of 2010. Various groups, like Project Hessdalen, have tried investigating these lights since 1983, using methods ranging from field studies to scientific research. As for what these lights actually are, no one really knows for sure. Some sightings have been explained away as things like car headlights or astronomical objects. One theory suggests they might come from a chemical reaction involving airborne dust from local mines. Another idea is that they could be clusters of particles interacting in a specific way due to the area's geology. Some researchers have even proposed that the lights might be a result of piezoelectricity due to certain rock types in the valley. Other theories include complex interactions between electromagnetic waves and dust, which could explain the light's unique shapes and colors. Saharan dust, which once even made its way to parts of the UK and left a red layer on cars, is full of naturally magnetic materials. On September 7, 2023, some folks noticed their cars were covered in reddish flecks because of the dust blown from the Sahara. A video making the rounds on Facebook showed someone using a magnet to lift the dust off their car. One commenter even got pretty heated, saying, "If you want to know what fell down last night, just grab a magnet and check this out," insisting it was metal, not sand. Naturally, this sparked chatter about how the dust's magnetic properties could be linked to chemtrails. But guess what? Experts are clear. that magnetism is actually normal for Saharan dust. According to Professor Barbara Marr from the Center for Environmental Magnetism and Paleomagnetism at Lancaster University, the dust carries a mix of particles from the African ground and some air pollution as it heads to Europe and the UK. The red color is due to hematite, a weakly magnetic mineral. Sure, the dust can pick up some human-made magnetic particles along the way, but scientists say those are usually way less abundant than the naturally occurring ones. The whole chemtrails idea, which suggests planes are intentionally spraying harmful substances, is based on conspiracy theories that have been thoroughly debunked. In short, the presence of magnetic particles in Saharan dust, like that of hematite giving its reddish tint, doesn't back up the chemtrail theory at all. Not having the internet in 2024 seems sorta abnormal, right? When we talk about internet access, it primarily comes down to wired connections, mobile networks, and satellites. Fiber optic cables connect most of the world, except Antarctica, and many small islands. Mobile networks are also widespread. Even in remote areas like the Sahara, you might find patchy access. For people in rural spots, satellite internet is often the best bet, even if it's slower. Still, there are a few truly isolated spots left. Deep caves like Georgia's Kerbera Cave are internet-free due to their depth. And under the ocean, signals struggle to get through, making internet access poor or non-existent.
Alright, let's go on a world tour. I'll show you the most curious things internet users have found across the globe. Little things light up cultures like nothing else. Let's start in a wonderland world, Asia. First stop, India, the country that will soon surpass China and will become the most populated country in the world. This right here is a street where many training and coaching centers are located. Now, in some states of India, people still widely follow a sustainable tradition of serving meals on banana leaves. A kind Redditor shared what a typical meal looks like. Another user commented that it is also common across the world in Puerto Rico. This right here is a regular day in Sri Lanka fishing. Tic Tacs are so expensive in Sri Lanka that little packs of 8 pieces are a thing. In China, some malls have a husband's storage. Women can leave their husbands there so that the boys can enjoy video games while their wives are shopping. It spares women from a lot of whining. Now this is a McDonald's located in an old newspaper stand. Even manholes are a work of art in Asia. Here's one example, a dragon art spotted by a user in Wuxi, China. Turns out, in China, eggs are sold in mesh bags. And of course, Asia has a bunch of snacks with unusual flavors. They even have cucumber-flavored chips. This guy went to get a coffee in Singapore and got it in a bag. Turns out it's quite common in Southeast Asia. Also, they take ice cream sandwiches there quite literally in Singapore. Thing is, they put ice cream between actual toasts. The Redditor confirms that it's weirdly delicious. Would you dare to try? Here's a first look at a city in Japan. A Redditor shared a beautiful photo made at night in Yokohama. Other internet users shared that they felt very safe there, even when walking at night. And this is a photo of a snowfall. I didn't know that in Japan they get that much snow. Turns out, many toilets there have sinks on top of them. The dirty water after you washed your hands is used to flush, which saves Japan millions of gallons of water. They also collect rainwater and then use it to wash the roads. The water in the street canal in Japan is so clean that fish swim there. In Japan, many manholes are beautifully ornated too, and several users shared some of them. These are Japanese rice fields, and this is one of the designs in their cans. A Redditor spotted a tiny house somewhere in Japan. I wish I could have had the tour. They have driverless KFC trucks roaming the street and selling you food. Turns out the Japanese don't have signatures. Instead, each person has a personal stamp that they use to sign documents. And this is a photo of a night bus. I wish every country's public transport was this cozy and comfortable. One Redditor went to see the White Temple in Thailand. You see, the buildings there are so stunning that even the toilet looks like this. This is a mobile 7-Eleven in Thailand. In Vietnam, tour guides can row with their feet only. This Redditor has proof. And now we're off to Australia. Some buses there have special stands for the passengers' surfboards. Since we like traffic lights today, I can't but show you this one. It features Mary Poppins, and it's installed in Queensland, the hometown of P.L. Travers, the author of Mary Poppins. The next country on today's tour is New Zealand. Look at this urban wonder, a new apartment building built over an older house. Also, the citizens of New Zealand enjoy a unique lemonade drink Coca-Cola produces just for them. What a VIP treatment! Now, let's move across the Pacific Ocean to North America. We start in the second biggest country in the world, Canada. One of the most common stereotypes about Canada is that they are very polite. Well, a Redditor posted a photo of a Canadian bus saying sorry for being full. Even the buses are polite there. Another user found an outdoor toilet, but of course dressed for cold weather. And one more user shared this photo. It was so windy in the town that the grass got blown off. As some Redditor commented, "I can't own anything. The wind tried stealing my grass." One more unusual occurrence. A Redditor shared a photo of a huge iceberg passing by. Now let's move to the U.S. and start in the northern state, Alaska. These light pillars are reflections of the ice crystals in the sky. A resident of Alaska opened the front door after a snowstorm. Did you know that the U.S. is the homeland of skyscrapers? Yep, the first skyscraper in the world was built in 1885 in Chicago. The home insurance building had 10 stories. Now, it's not even close to a skyscraper, but that was the start. And look what this Redditor found in Seattle. It's not unfinished work, it's a skyscraper built on top of an 11-story pedestal called Rainier Tower. This is an abandoned diner somewhere in the California desert. Here's another interesting photo from a Redditor. A Mexican restaurant moved to a building where KFC had been. Instead of removing the logo, they just added a sombrero, a mustache, and a poncho. I say, genius! Since we talked about Mexico, let's move there. One user shared a pack of toast bread without any crusts, and another Redditor showed that potato chips go with a small packet of salsa there. Here's a Mexican crosswalk. The man on it has a dog and a hat. And this user shared photos of how his grandma hand-painted a toilet in Mexico. And this toilet brush holder gives me chills. Mexico is a whole different world. Cenotes are caused by erosion in the limestone bedrock, and they hold ground and rainwater. But this Redditor probably didn't expect to see this wonder right by a Costco store. The award for the stadium with the most mesmerizing view probably goes to this one. Turns out the Bahamas are home to the biggest underwater statue in the world, which is called Ocean Atlas. Here's a photo from a Redditor. It's magnificent. You can even see a woman sitting on its hand for comparison. And here's a curiosity from Belize. Apparently, they sell bagged drinking water there. It's very common in Central and South America. And this user met a grasshopper in Costa Rica. The hand is for comparison. Now, I have a question. What do Costa Rica and Australia have in common? Central America is hot. The average annual temperature there is 81 degrees Fahrenheit. No wonder this taxi in Panama only has controls for cold air. Okay, let's say bye to Central America and see what South America has in store for us. And the first store is in Colombia. A Redditor shared that in Bogota, people are paid for dressing as traffic cones and shaming drivers for parking on the street, which makes them move somewhere else. Having a stroll down the stairs of Brazil doesn't seem easy. You can run into trees like this one. Asia is well known for crazy chocolate flavors, but look what this Redditor found in Brazil. Snickers bars with coconut flavors, passion fruit, and even caramel and bacon. Here's a 20 peso bill from Argentina. It has guanaco on it. We still have to move across the Atlantic and visit Europe and Africa. See you in the next video.
If you've ever wondered what it feels like to walk on diamonds, head straight to the town of Nördlingen in Germany. It seems like a typical fairy tale village with cute houses and red roofs. But its walls and streets are actually studded with over 72,000 diamonds. You'll need a microscope to see them, but they're definitely there. When the first people came to live here, somewhere around the 9th century CE, they were positive they were settling down in a volcanic crater. They didn't know the stone they were using for construction was embedded with millions of tiny diamonds, and the origins of the crater were out of this world. An asteroid slightly larger than half a mile in diameter hit our planet around 14.5 million years ago in what is now Bavaria and left a crater 16 miles wide. The bedrock was under such intense heat and pressure that the bubbles of carbon inside transformed into tiny diamonds at a concentration like nowhere else in the world. The locals didn't pay attention to their houses, built of what was left of that asteroid impact, shimmering on sunrise. Then, in the 1960s, 2 geologists arrived from the USA, studied the landscape from a distance, and noticed it didn't look exactly like a volcanic crater. After further research, they realized their theory that the crater was shaped from above and not from below proved right. They even had to change school books after the discovery, not to mislead the students. Once the word of the crater had spread, NASA got interested in it and sent their Apollo 14 and Apollo 16 astronauts to visit it to learn about what kind of rocks they'd find in space and which of them were worth bringing home. A moon rock that arrived with one of the missions is now on display at the local museum, and astronauts still visit the place. The locals, though, are so used to living among diamonds, they don't even find it special. The Australian town of Coober Pedy is known as the opal capital of the world and exists completely underground. The town even has the first 4-star underground hotel in the world. The reason people settled in this area was to work at an opal mine. Back in the day, the miners could hardly survive under the burning desert sun, so someone decided to put a tent directly into the mine. Then it turned into a home. Now, Coober Pedy has around 2,500 residents from different countries, about 30 shops, an opal gallery, museums, a bar, and other buildings, and is a popular tourist attraction. The town of Monowi, Nebraska, in the USA, has a mayor, a clerk, a treasurer, a librarian, a tavern keeper, and a bartender. Yet, the population is officially just 1. Elsie Eiler has been doing all those jobs, paying taxes to herself, and voting herself for mayor since 2004. Back in the 1930s, Monowi had a population of 150 people, grocery shops, and restaurants. When farming conditions got worse, people started leaving family by family until it went down to 1 person. If you feel like saving some money on house construction, look up some property in the Spanish town of Centenil de las Bodegas. 3,000 residents live under and into the sides of the Cadiz Mountains and use them as natural walls and ceilings. The first settlers moved in here back in prehistoric times. The rocks keep the houses cool in the summer and warm in the winter. Neft Dashleri in Azerbaijan was built as an oil platform in 1940, directly in the Caspian Sea. Once they discovered rich oil deposits, it started growing and is now made up of a network of platforms with around 5,000 people working and living here. The town has apartments, bridges, a library, a community center, and even a movie theater. The Japanese village of Nagoro has an unofficial second name, the Scarecrow Village. The last children were born here over 20 years ago. It officially has less than 50 residents, but it feels complete thanks to 350 life-size human dolls. When a local lady came back here in 2000 to look after her aging father, she saw the empty streets, shops, and schools. To change that, she and her friends started making cute dolls to replace the residents. The entire town of Whittier, Alaska, lives under one roof of a 14-story building of a former barracks. That's around 220 people who live here all year round. plus all the shops, a police station, a post office, a hospital, and a church. The locals are mostly working in commercial fishing, recreation, and tourism, or for the state ferry and railroad. The idea behind having everyone and everything in one place is to save money on heating in the always cold climate and let the people do all their business inside. This way, they don't have to face the unbearably strong winds. There's a town in Svalbard, Norway called Longyearbyen, where the sun sets on October 25th and doesn't rise again for the next 4 months. When it rises again in spring, the locals gather on the step of an old hospital at 12:15 to welcome the sun and celebrate its return. Then, it doesn't set for over 4 months. It happens because of the way the Earth is tilted on its axis. The sun only rises and sets once each year at the North and South Poles. Longyearbyen is the northernmost town in the world, so it gets affected by that. Its residents occasionally see polar bears and reindeer in the streets and get around on snowmobiles. The Italian village of Viganella was built right at the bottom of a deep valley and on the wrong side of the mountains. They cast huge shadows and deprived the village of the sun for the entire winter. The locals used to live like that for centuries, until one engineer decided to build a large mirror high on the opposite slope of the mountain. It's operated by a computer and reflects light on the central square of Viganella for at least 6 hours a day during the darkest months. Santa Cruz del Islote in Colombia is one of the world's most crowded islands, with around 600 residents in a 2.5-acre area. Fishermen built this island on a coral platform over a century ago. They chose it because of its beautiful location and the absence of mosquitoes. The families of the original settlers were growing, and most of them never left the island. You'll only find people with 6 different last names living here. When the family needs extra space, they just add an extra floor to one of around 100 homes in town. Now it has a school, shops, a church, and 1 restaurant. There is no traffic, since the streets aren't wide enough for cars or trucks, and the distances are perfectly walkable. No one on the island locks their doors, because everyone knows each other, and there hasn't been a single crime. Another place where people don't lock their doors is the Shani Shingnapur village in India. In fact, local homes and even shops don't have front doors, keys, and locks, but locals never feel unsafe. Residents believe their village is under the protection of Lord Shani, who will punish anyone who tries to steal something. A legend says that around 300 years ago, after heavy rain and flooding, the locals found a huge rock. The same night, Lord Shani appeared in the dreams of the village head and promised to protect the village if they kept the rock in the village unsheltered. The deity would live on the rock and oversee the village. Once the first bank opened in the village, they added a glass entrance and a barely visible electromagnetic lock with a remote control to respect the tradition. If you're looking for the most relaxed place in the world, check out the Villages in Florida. You can't move here unless there is at least one person over 55 in your home. And you'd have to leave behind any family members under 19. The most popular means of transportation in the villages is a golf cart. There are all sorts of free fun activities for the residents, so it's far from boring.
In Mongolia, dinosaurs used to live, and now there are as many horses as there are people and 10 times as many sheep there. It's the emptiest country in the world. The capital has been moved 28 times, and they even have their own Olympics. So Mongolia is located right here, on the plateau of Central Asia, right north of China. It's the 19th country in the world by land area, but it only has a bit over 3 million people. It's like the population of Los Angeles, but having a whole country to themselves. If we don't count Greenland, Mongolia is the country with the lowest population density. It has only 2 people per half a square mile. The United States has 37. Well, that is if we only count people. Mongolia has a lot of livestock, about 67 million. It's 20 times more than the number of people there. Half of that livestock is sheep. Yet of all their animals, The most prestigious one is the horse. There's a traditional saying, "A Mongol without a horse is like a bird without wings," and it explains a lot. A person with many horses is considered wealthy, but don't picture huge farms with big stables filled with horses. In Mongolia, having stables is more of an exception. Horses there roam free outside all year long. It costs next to nothing to sustain a horse there because they roam outside and even find food themselves, and the country's nature provides them with enough. Winter is tough because everything is covered in snow, but horses can separate grass from snow. They get frail by spring due to a lack of food, but recover very soon after winter is over. A family can have a sacred horse in their herd. It wears a blue scarf around its neck and is almost never ridden. People there do love their horses, and this tender relationship goes centuries back. There are many songs, stories, myths, and artwork featuring horses. In the Mongolian language, there are about 500 words to describe the traits of horses, and over 200 words to describe the coat color and pattern alone. Horses have a spiritual meaning too. It's believed that they have spirits that can help the owner, and they are also believed to be a transport to heaven, so they were often sacrificed after their owner's passing. Apart from domestic animals, the country is home to some endangered species. Plus, back in the day, dinosaurs roamed the land. The first ever discovered dinosaur egg was found right there. Today, dinosaurs are, of course, extinct, except in the movies. But there are snow leopards in Mongolia, and those are also rare. If you ever do go to this country, you must be careful. Snow leopards are so quiet, you won't hear them approaching you. They make no sound as they walk. But let's get back to geography. The climate in Mongolia can be harsh and unpredictable. Within just one day, the temperature can change by 35 degrees Fahrenheit. The country doesn't have any access to large bodies of water. That's why it's very dry and doesn't get much rain. In the south of Mongolia, there is a part of one of the coldest deserts on Earth, the Gobi Desert. Only 5% of the desert is covered in sand. The rest is bare rock. It has rivers, small lakes, and grasslands, but also gold, coal, and copper. So it's not a very typical desert, but still a desert. Rain clouds don't reach there because of the Himalayan range that keeps the area in the shadow. The desert is expanding every year, because of climate change, of course, but also because of deforestation and changes in land use. The whole country is quite dry with little precipitation, and that's why the inhabitants aren't afraid of the desert. Yes, the desert is populated. There are people living there. They're nomads who are busy with raising cattle. Nomads are people who don't have a settled home. They travel with their animals from place to place following the seasons. When they settle somewhere before their next trip, they set up a tent that is called a yurt. These have been homes in Mongolia for thousands of years, and it's amazing that some people still live in them. The skeleton of a yurt is made of poles, which are then covered with layers of felt and waterproof fabric. The Mongols are a very welcoming nation overall, but the nomads are on a whole other level. They don't get guests often, and they're always ready to greet someone and give them a taste of traditional horse milk. They don't even have bells at the entrance of their yurts, inviting guests to walk right in. Of course, there are also people who live in cities and villages and have settled homes, and they are the majority, about 3/4 of the population. The biggest city in the country is the capital, Ulaanbaatar. Almost half of the country's population is concentrated there, in just one city, even though it's the coldest capital city in the world. The average yearly temperature there is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. The average temperature in Washington, D.C. is 60 degrees, and it's 44 in Ottawa. When the city was first founded in the 17th century, it was located about 180 miles southwest of the current place. Then it was moved a little bit 28 times until it finally settled in the current location. Why? Well, back then, most of the population were nomads, so the capital city was a mobile settlement too. Depending on seasons, pastures, water supplies, and many other factors, it moved along with its inhabitants. Now the city is big and settled, so maybe it won't be moved again. But who knows? I know. I have yet to tell you about the Mongolian Olympic Games. The event is called Nadam Festival. is an annual festival held in the middle of summer that most Mongolians watch. In one form or another, the festival has existed for centuries. Locally, the festival is called the Three Games of Men, and people compete in 3 skills that have traditionally been considered 3 manly skills. So, what are those 3 games? It's Mongolian wrestling, horse racing, and archery. Originally, it was just men competing, but recently women have started participating in archery and horse racing. Mongolian wrestling is a folk wrestling style that's been around for thousands of years. The depictions of it can be seen on many ancient plates found in the area. Today, it's the most popular sport in the country, and Mongolia hosts many international tournaments too. So, of course, there is a wrestling part at the festival, and it's the first game. The rules are quite simple. Whoever touches the ground with anything other than a foot loses. There are no weight classes, no age or time limits, so it takes as long as it needs to win. And yet, they do it with grace. Match courtesy is important. For example, if an opponent's clothes get tangled, the other one is supposed to stop and help solve the issue, even if it means missing a good opportunity to win. At the end of the match, when one participant is defeated, the winner will give them a hand and help them back up on their feet. The game starts with either 512 or 1,024 participants who wrestle in pairs. Every loser is eliminated. The game goes on for 9 or 10 rounds, depending on the initial number of participants, until there is a winner. Then there's horse racing. This is a cross-country long-distance event, between 10 to 17 miles, depending on the age of the horse. Up to 1,000 horses from all over Mongolia can participate in the competition. Then, in archery, people compete in teams of 10. Each archer wears traditional clothes and has 4 arrows to shoot into a wall of woven or wooden cylinders. Knock one out of the wall and you get points, and the team that gets the most points wins.
Spotted in Japan. These private egg-like sleeping pods allow you to travel by overnight bus and stay in your own shell at the same time. Perfect choice for introverts, huh? Tokyo-based bus company Willer Express introduced this feature in 2020. Each bus has 18 spacious reclining seats with rests for feet and neck, foldable tables, and holders for cups, bags, and smartphones. And a blanket, of course. But what's even more important, each pod is equipped with electrical outlets to charge all your devices. There are 3 seats in a row. Can't wait to test these private pods on your own? You can book them on Willer's line of Reborn buses. The ticket price varies from around $100. And since we're visiting Japan, don't be surprised to find this device in one of the fast food restaurants. It's implemented in a sink to provide disinfecting for the customer's smartphones while they're washing their hands. This system, named Wash, W-O-S-H, was developed by the Japanese company Wota. All you need to do is put your gadget inside this little opening. It will disappear for a while, just like cash in an ATM. But unlike the money, your phone will actually come back to you safe and clean in just 30 seconds. Don't forget to take it out. But even if you forget your phone at the sink, there's a good chance that no one will steal it. Japan is famed as one of the most low-crime nations. One Reddit user posted a touching story that proves this claim. Here's a picture of her shopping bag dropped on the streets of Osaka. When she went back to look for it later that day, she saw the bag lying next to a tree, untouched. Apparently, someone carefully put it there so that the owner could pick up the lost things. Isn't it adorable? Another cool feature from Japan is spiral escalators. Japanese company Mitsubishi still remains the only manufacturer of these twisted staircases in the entire world. This one is installed at the front entrance of Mitsubishi Electric in Ozawa Works. Spiral escalators smoothly go up and down in the shape of a semicircle, while the riders enjoy the panoramic view. But this is a fairly rare occurrence. There are only 91 of these staircases globally. Can you guess a country just by looking at this picture? Australia, of course. This epic shot was made at a camping ground. I wonder how this kangaroo is going to get out of the toilet. You see, these animals are not equipped to hop or move backwards because of their long feet and a large tail. This is one of the reasons why the kangaroo appears on the Australian coat of arms along with the emu. Neither animal can move backwards easily. That's why they were chosen as symbols of a nation that's always moving forward. And this is what Tasmanian lemons look like. No, they don't actually grow without skin. But the local possums took care of it. And they didn't even bother picking the lemons from the tree. One internet user spotted these guys in the garden and noticed that they only like lemon skin and leaves. This creates a great symbiosis because people usually use the insides of a lemon. And since we're walking among the woods, be aware of golden huntsman spiders because they love this habitat. The adult huntsman spiders have leg spans that can measure up to 6 inches. These creepy guys are members of the family Sparacidae. They received this name thanks to their speed and mode of hunting. But they have one more title, giant crab spiders, because of their appearance and size. Although huntsman spiders are venomous and their bites can be painful to humans, usually they don't require any hospital treatment. Check this out! Can you guess the country where this thermometer picture was taken? Australia again! The highest temperature ever recorded in this country was 123 degrees Fahrenheit. But it's not a world record. The hottest day in history happened in 1913 in California. It reached 134 degrees Fahrenheit. And here's another bus feature for introverts. Some city buses in Finland have this thumbs up button to thank the driver when leaving. Too bad they don't have a thumbs down button for balance. What if the ride wasn't so nice? How about riding a Ferris wheel instead? In Finland, you can do it in a personal sauna gondola. The first sky sauna in the world began operation in 2016. Many tourists and locals have been enjoying this feature over the years. This little gondola allows you to enjoy the warmth of a real sauna while riding 131 feet off the ground and looking at the breathtaking view over Helsinki. After landing, the bathers can relax in a jacuzzi and take a shower afterwards. Of course, manufacturers had to be creative when it came to power sources in the gondola. As a result, they built a custom electric heater to provide constant energy supply. Did you know that kebab pizza is a national food of Sweden? Surprisingly, it's one of the most popular fast food dishes in the country. This pizza is topped with kebab meat and other ingredients such as tomato sauce, cheese, onion, peppers, and kebab sauce. The toppings may vary between restaurants, but in general, this meal combines both Italian and Turkish cuisine. It was invented by Middle Eastern immigrants in Sweden, but the original creator of the kebab pizza is unknown, as well as the precise time of its invention. But it's believed to appear in the 1980s when kebab and falafel restaurants began to open across Sweden. In some regions, it became common to offer both pizza and kebab. And at some point, someone got a genius idea to mix it all in one disgustingly delicious course. Please welcome another weird national dish, fermented shark, called hakarl. It's a traditional food in Iceland. Many people wonder why Icelanders eat it rotten, and the reason is quite simple. Otherwise, the Greenland shark is poisonous when fresh. The process of fermentation is rather long and complicated, but it helps to get rid of all the poisonous substances. The traditional method begins with placing the shark in a shallow hole dug in gravelly sand. The shark is then covered with sand and stones to press the fluids out of the body. The further fermentation process takes from 6 to 12 weeks, depending on the season. Then the shark is cut and hung to dry for several months. And after that, all you need to do is to remove the brown crust and cut the fatty shark paste into small pieces. Bon appetit! Peru has the highest sand dune on the planet, Cerro Blanco, located in the arid Nazca region of southwest Peru. It's known as the Everest of the desert. It covers almost 4,000 feet from base to summit, and the view is absolutely stunning. This dune can be found near another curious feature, the Nazca Lines. Located in southern Peru, this group of geoglyphs was discovered etched into the desert sands. Geoglyphs are basically large-scale drawings made on the ground by arranging lines of stones. They had astronomical purposes and served as pilgrimage sites. Nazca Lines cover an area of nearly 190 square miles and include about 70 images of animals and plants, and more than 300 geometric figures. Some of them are 1,200 feet long. That's why the figures are most visible from the air or nearby hilltops. Scientists believe that the lines were drawn by the Nazca people, who flourished from around AD 1 to 700. And since we're talking about Instagram-friendly deserts, check this out. This isn't a prehistoric giant. It's a sculpture called Mano de Desierto, the desert hand in the middle of the Atacama Desert in Chile. A giant hand reaching for the sky has a base of iron and concrete. The sculpture is 36 feet tall and is located around 3,600 feet above sea level. It's the work of the Chilean sculptor Mario Irarrázaval, inaugurated in 1992. The sculpture is known as a symbol of the human soul's vulnerability and its path through adversity to the stars. You can find it 46 miles south of the city of Antofagasta. Make epic shots and take a moment to reflect on your own path.
Now, when you think of Norway, things that come to mind are the sun that never sets in the summer, unbelievable nature, the fact that it's one of the happiest countries in the world, even white bears that freely roam in the wild. I'm guessing they're happy too. Already planning your trip to this dream country? Well, don't rush. You'll have to review your budget. Fuel there is 10 to 15% more expensive than in other Western European countries. A meal at a cafe for one person will cost at least $30. Plus, consider yourself lucky if you manage to find a hotel at $100 a night. If you Google the most expensive country in the world, you'll see this list. Switzerland, which is memishly expensive. The United States, duh, been there, know that. Luxembourg is not a surprise either. And then, all of a sudden, you see Norway. Just so you know, a family of 4 would need over $4,000 a month just to exist in Norway. And it doesn't even include rent. Specialists say that Norway is around 7% more expensive than in the US. Norway is a bit weird though. Usually the richest countries have national currencies that are stronger than the US dollar. Take Swiss francs, for example, or the Kuwaiti dinar, which is literally the boss when it comes to currencies. Like one Kuwaiti dinar can snag you $3.25 US. Now, here's where the mismatch comes. The Norwegian krone is dubbed the weakest currency in the West. Well, how come? In the wild world of global currencies, the Norwegian krone used to be a tough player known for smart money moves. But surprisingly, it is now the weakest currency in the West, taking a big hit in the last decade. It has fallen hard against the US dollar and euro, causing concern for central banks and money folks worldwide. The oil price roller coaster is a major factor in the krone's struggle, as Norway relies heavily on oil exports. But even with oil prices relatively high, it remains historically weak against major currencies. The weak Norwegian krone is affecting everyday folks too, with prices rising on almost everything due to heavy imports. Inflation is growing, leading to interest rate hikes by the Norges Bank. High interest rates are hurting the housing market and making life more expensive for Norwegian citizens. So one of the supposed reasons for why Norway is so expensive might be weak national currency. What else is particular about Norway? Well, climate for sure. It may be hard to imagine a freezingly cold country plunging into riches. It's an imagery we usually see on social media with geotags Dubai, Saudi Arabia, or even Kuwait. And it makes sense to think now that all the riches are somewhere southward, as these places have strong oil-based economies and super strong currencies. But in reality, better economies in the south are a current trend. Ever wonder why cold countries seem to be raking in the cash while the hot nations are just hanging out? Turns out, those living in chilly climates had to hustle just to survive winter. Think building shelter, stockpiling food, and keeping that fire burning. Meanwhile, those basking in the sunshine had it a little easier with hunting and foraging year-round. This theory holds true even in the land down under. Sydney and Melbourne, the top dogs in Australia's wealth game, also happen to be some of the coldest cities, while Darwin, the warmest city, is lagging behind. Some might argue that this theory doesn't hold up when we look at ancient civilizations or modern hotspots like tropical Singapore. But hey, times change, and so does wealth generation. Back in the day, it was all about farming, but now it's more about industry and innovation. So, Norway may seem to have been bound to get rich historically and geographically. Still, it's not exactly so. Norway used to struggle a lot. Back in the day, it faced some tough times with harsh winters and tricky geography. They even had famines that pushed families to seek a better life in the US. So, how did Norway go from rags to riches? Yep, oil and gas played a big role. The country is small, but it has around 0.31% of all oil reserves in the world. But in Norway, there's more to the story than just black gold. For example, the top oil reserve is not some Arab country, but Venezuela, which claims up to 20% of the world's liquid gold. Still, Venezuelan's economy is far from stable, so it's not all about oil. Although bested in forest size by other European nations, Norway was an unrivaled powerhouse in lumber during the Age of Sail. Thanks to its strategic fjord path, timber from its inland forests could quickly reach fjordside mills and global markets. As railroads unlocked larger forest potential in other countries post the 19th century, Norway was Europe's timber king, bolstered by a world-class merchant fleet by the 20th century. The Norwegian timber wealth, coupled with early cooperative societal norms, spurred growth across several sectors, from agriculture to fishing and banking. Despite being labeled poor in the 19th century, Norway's GDP per capita outshone Eastern and Southern European nations. The nation's ascendancy continues beyond the discovery of its oil reserves. Norway is unique, with a small population but sprawling land. Despite its vastness, the Nordics are scattered and considered one of the most spacious countries globally. Much of the North's territory stretches beyond the Arctic Circle, offering harsh landscapes with thin topsoil covering the bedrock. The tough terrain in Norway, full of mountains and with a short growing season, limits arable land to only 2.2%, similar to Yemen. The scattered arable land in small valleys makes extensive farming impractical, a far cry from the efficient farming in the US. With a huge chunk of land and coastlines, but a small population, Norway makes some serious cash from its reserves. Plus, nature has been pretty kind to Norway, with rich fishing grounds, hydropower from rivers, and power from cold waters. And only then comes the little thing called oil. The late 50s saw a big discovery that changed everything for Norway's economy. Fast forward to today, and petroleum activities have been a major game changer for Norway, feeding its economic growth and funding its welfare state. But Norway didn't just sit back and watch the money flow in. They made smart moves, like creating a sovereign wealth fund to manage their oil wealth for the long haul. The fund sees some big bucks, currently standing at 1.7 billion Norwegian kroner, or over 160 million US dollars. Norway uses the interest from this fund to boost its annual budget, ensuring top-notch healthcare, education, and welfare for its citizens. And here's the kicker: Norway's not resting on its laurels. They're investing in sustainable technologies, like offshore wind power, to secure a bright future beyond oil and gas. Now, Norway may be expensive, but it can't compete with the world's costliest place to live, Monaco. It's almost 4 times more expensive than the global average. So, if you're looking to rub elbows with the rich and famous, look no further than Monaco. With property prices soaring to an average of over $50,000 per square meter in 2022, it's no wonder why this tiny country is a magnet for the la-di-da. However, there's a place that's particularly expensive for tourists, and I'm not talking about tourist traps. Neither Oslo nor Monaco can beat the prices in, well, take a second to make your guess. Ready? Welcome to Ashgabat, Turkmenistan's capital. A gallon of milk costs a whopping $15 US, while a standard internet subscription plan will set you back $168 US a month. Calm down, you're not poor, it's just an economic glitch. The reason for these prices is simple. The Turkmen national currency exchange rate in relation to dollars is fixed and never changes. $1 equals 3.5 manats, and has been so since 2015. Local prices in the local currency grew to inflation, making it not proportionate to prices in dollars. The exchange rate never changes. So if you live there, such prices don't seem to be extraordinary. But if you come with dollars, you're in for a pricey trip.
From tiny islands to giant cities fanning out for dozens of miles, you're gonna learn about the most densely populated places on Earth. It'll make you question the limits of the impossible. To what lengths are people ready to go in their search of a better life, or simply trying to survive? The list of such places includes both Hong Kong and the Maldives, the Egyptian city of Tanta, and a tiny island in Lake Victoria in Africa. Let's find out more about how people manage to live there. Hong Kong has an official population of 7.5 million people, and this number is expected to reach 8.5 million by 2041. The density of the city's population is more than 18,000 people per square mile. Despite a rather low birth rate, the population of Hong Kong is on the rise. This paradox has an explanation. A lot of people immigrate to Hong Kong all the time because of all the opportunities this city offers, like various jobs. The city has an incredibly high price of land. It's one of the main reasons for its high-density development. People with low and even middle incomes can only afford to live in high-rise buildings, and Hong Kong has more than 9,000 of those. Plus, there are more than 300 buildings that are over 490 feet in height. It's more than New York, Shanghai, and Dubai can boast. Hong Kong's incredible growth as one of the tallest cities in the world has a lot to do with its incredible urban planning. At the same time, housing is unbelievably expensive in this region. Median home costs are 18 times the median annual income. That's the reason why less fortunate residents live in the so-called coffin houses, where apartments are tinier than a standard parking space in the USA. Take Quarry Bay, for example, a densely packed neighborhood in eastern Hong Kong, and its Monster Building. It's actually not one building, but a group of 5 connected constructions. There are more than 2,200 units in these 5 blocks, and rumor has it that it houses around 10,000 people. Despite such cramped living conditions most Hong Kong's inhabitants have to deal with, the city is home to several dozen billionaires. Look, this is half a football field, and that's what 1/3 of Bill Gates' home looks like. Another example for you, 2/5 of the White House. These are not random numbers. That's the territory of Migingo Island, located in Lake Victoria between Kenya and Uganda. Over 100 people live on this tiny piece of land. Don't you think that those metal-tiled roofs make the island look like a huge turtle floating on the water? Unfortunately, because of the island's small size, there's barely any vegetation there. Most of the surface of the island is covered with rocks, except for this tiny area. It's covered with grass and hosts not more than 5 shrubs. The island is all about fish and fishing. The landing point turns into a fish market every day at noon. The trade doesn't last long. It usually finishes at 2 p.m. when the boat leaves. The only thing the inhabitants of the island have is fish. So every morning, they get essential supplies for small businesses from Kenya. That's why you can buy everything you need in local stores, from food to fishing equipment. The inhabitants of the island not only catch fish but also gut them on the rocks and then fry and eat them in cafes. Yep, there are around 13 cafes and bars on the islands where people eat, play dice, and cook ugali, a typical dish made from maize flour. Back to giant cities and busy streets. Welcome to Shenzhen, the most densely populated city in China. This city hosts around 17.5 million people. With so many inhabitants, the city faces loads of challenges. For example, overcrowded schools and beaches. Speaking of the latter, some areas even implement a booking system to manage beach crowds. The most astonishing thing about this megapolis is that it's grown to its current size within a mere 40 years or so. It used to be a fishing village, but then, thanks to the support of the authorities and the city's close proximity to Hong Kong, it turned into a bustling financial and economic center. These days, it has the status of one of the busiest container ports in the world, along with Shanghai and Singapore. Shenzhen also has had the fastest growth in millionaires over the last 10 years, 140%. Such an increase is far greater than in the first-tier cities in China, including Beijing and Shanghai. Islet Abrui is a Caribbean island that forms part of Haiti, and it's one of the most densely populated islands in the world. Around 500 people living there share an area of a mere 0.4 hectares. You might think this is just another fishing village, but Islet Abrui is more like a factory. Once you set foot on this island, you'll instantly see a maze of alleyways. Follow them, walking past crooked thatch and tarp-covered huts, and you'll eventually find yourself in the center of town. The main landmarks are two concrete buildings, and one of them is a store. In the middle, you'll see a modest town square equipped with two solar streetlights. One is old and is no longer in use, and the other is shiny and new. On the island, men outnumber women and kids. Many people are out of town fishing during the day. The horizon surrounding the island is dotted with sails and pirogues. The rest remain on the island doing other jobs, like repairing boats, mending nets and traps, and preparing tons of fish for shipment to Haiti and other places. As for kids, they spend their days swimming. Our last destination is the Egyptian city of Tanta, which is also one of the most densely populated places in the world. It has about 70,000 people per square mile. Just for comparison, there are slightly under 30,000 people per square mile in New York. The city is located between Cairo and Alexandria. It has huge cotton plantations, and in 1856 it became a stop on the railway network, mostly for exporting the cotton growing in the area to Europe. And even though the area around Tanta was mostly fields, the settlement turned into a large, crowded city. In late October, the city becomes the center of celebration of the cotton harvest. 3 million people come from around the Delta and other parts of the Arab world for the colorful 8-day celebration. Tanta is famous for its sweet candy. It's made of gelatin, coconut, sesame, peanuts, and chickpeas. Loads of these sweets are sold during festivals when many Egyptians visit the city. No wonder they've been considered a delicacy since the 1800s. Tanta also has a lot of cotton processing factories, as well as textile industries. Plus, it's a university town. Tanta University was established in 1972. Male, the capital of the Maldives, has a population of more than 200,000 people. It means 49,000 people per square mile. 80% of the land sits around 4 feet above sea level, which means that if part of the islands go underwater, people will have to relocate. An artificial island that was created to manage waste is getting overburdened. In 1997, Hula Male, another artificial island, was built to alleviate dramatic population pressure. These days, it's already as developed as Male. The Maldives consists of more than 1,000 islands stretching along a 500-mile axis. All of them are coral islands. They grew around the rims of prehistoric undersea volcanoes. Only 188 islands are inhabited, but most of them have fewer than 1,000 residents. More and more Maldivians are giving up on island life and moving to the capital city. But Male is already pressed hard against the limits of human habitation. If even more people move there, its physical structure would need to be completely reworked. The authorities are already surrounding Male with sea bridges and artificial islands packed with houses.
Right now, as I speak from the United States, it is the year 2022. You're likely watching in the same year, unless this video has now been up for 2 years, in which case it's 2024. If so, hello from the past. But what if you're watching from the year 111 or 4720? Am I talking to you from the future or the past? I'm confused. For example, if you're in China in 2022, it is the year 4720. And similarly, if in North Korea, it's the year 111. Not all countries have the same calendar, Most of the world uses the Gregorian calendar. It was established in the 16th century and replaced the Julian calendar. Let's do a speedy aerial trip around the world and visit some countries that are in different year zones. We power through the atmosphere. Where shall we stop? Let's start with one of the world's most populous nations, China. Okay, hang back a bit so we can see the surrounding countries too, as some use the Chinese calendar as well. Countries such as Mongolia, South Korea, and Vietnam. According to the Chinese lunar year calendar, the current year, as of February 2022, is actually the year 4720, thousands of years into the future. But not really. The chronology starts from the date Emperor Wang Di started his reign in 2637 BCE. The calendar is cyclic and is based on the astronomical cycles of Jupiter. Within 60 years, Jupiter goes around the Sun 5 times, and those are the 5 elements of the Chinese calendar. One circle of Jupiter around the Sun takes 12 years. These years receive their names from animals. 2022, on the Gregorian calendar, is the year of the tiger. It's not only dates that are measured differently. People's ages are also complex. The chronology starts from 1, not 0. A newborn is 1 year old from birth. Their age increases with the coming of a new year, but not with their birth date. That means that all family members gathering together on New Year's become 1 year older with the passing of the New Year clock. That's why the age of an Asian person can be 2 years different from the age of a European person, even if they were born on the same day. Let's go up again. We may as well stay in the area. Let's move south. Yes, to North Korea. There, they use the Juche calendar. It has been used since July 8, 1997, together with the Gregorian calendar. The Juche calendar begins with the birth of Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea, and the eternal president of the country. His birth year, 1912, became Juche 1 in the Juche calendar. The calendar was adopted 3 years after the passing of Kim Il-sung. His year of birth is called Year 1. There is no Year 0 on this calendar. This makes the year 2022 Year 111 in North Korea. When writing dates, both calendars are used. Let's fly up again into the atmosphere and travel west, not too far away, to the populous country of India. The calendar of India was created in 1957. It's based on the Saqqara era, the ancient system of chronology that is widely used in India and Cambodia. It's also used in Java and Bali. There are also other calendars in India used by different nations and tribes. Some start the chronology from Krishna's date of passing, 3102 BCE. Others date it from 1957, specifically March 22, 1957, or Chaitra 1, 1879 in the Saqqara era. Its year 0 corresponds to the year 78 in the Julian calendar. In 1957, India decided to bring all of the calendars in use into one to create a type of uniformity for the country. There were 30 different calendars to consider. The Gregorian calendar is the most widely used. Time to leave India and head west again and across to Saudi Arabia. Here, the chronology starts from Hijra in the first emigration to Medina, 622 CE. The day here starts at sunset, not at midnight. The beginning of a month is the day when the crescent moon first appears after the new moon. A year is 10 to 11 days shorter than the solar year. Months move in relation to seasons. Those months that were in summer will take place in winter after some time, and vice versa. So what year is it in Saudi Arabia? In 2022, the year there is 1443. Let's go across again and narrow in on Iran. Here, things work a little differently, as they do in Afghanistan too. They use the solar Hijri calendar. It is also known as the Persian or Iranian calendar. It's considered one of the most accurate calendars in the world. Unlike the Gregorian calendar, which follows a set of certain rules to stay in sync with the solar year, the solar Hijri calendar is based on astronomical observations. The year begins at midnight, closest to the vernal equinox in Iran. It's when the daytime and nighttime are equal in length. The first day of the new year is called Nowruz. Let's leave Iran now and head over to Israel, a tiny country in comparison. Here, they have their own calendar, but like many other places, they use it along with the Gregorian one. The start of a new day begins precisely when the sun goes below the horizon, meaning at sunset. This explains why their holiday begins the evening before the first actual day of it. The year count began on October 7, 3761 BCE. This puts the time currently in the 6th millennium, specifically year 5782. The practice was implemented in the 12th century when a philosopher, Maimonides, established the time frame as the date of creation. Whipping over to Japan now, where there are also two existing calendars, the more traditional one based on the years of the Japanese emperor's reigns. Every emperor gives his period a name, the motto of his reign. From the year 1989, there had been an era of peace and tranquility. The throne belonged to Emperor Akihito. The present era, Reiwa, formally began on May 1st, 2019, when Emperor Akihito's elder son, Naruhito, ascended the throne as the 126th Emperor of Japan. Officially, 2022 corresponds to Reiwa 4. Popping across to Thailand now. Here, 2022 is the year 2565. Officially, Thailand lives according to the lunar calendar, in which the chronology starts from a traditional but significant cultural event. Still, they use the Gregorian calendar as well. Exceptions are often made for visitors from other countries, and the dates on goods and documents are written according to this calendar. This particular calendar is also used in Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar. Heading across to Africa, and specifically Ethiopia, where their calendar is 8 years behind the Gregorian one. It also has 13 months in a year. 12 months have 30 days, and the last one is very short, just 5 or 6 days depending on whether it is a leap year or not. Also, their day doesn't begin at midnight, but at sunrise. The Ethiopian calendar is based on the ancient calendar of Alexandria, which means they're in the year 2014 during 2022. Let's take a closer look at the Gregorian calendar as it's the most widely used. It was based closely on the Julian calendar, which was created in 46 BC by Julius Caesar. The previous Roman calendar was very complicated, based on various lunar phases. The Julian calendar was designed with Greek mathematicians and astronomers. It comprised a normal year of 365 days and a leap year, with one extra day every 4th year. This makes it 1/100th of a day longer than the actual solar year. Thus, for any day from 1901 to 2099, the Julian date is 13 days behind the Gregorian one. In other words, whatever day it is when you're watching this video, subtract 13 days and that's the Julian date. The official switch to the Gregorian calendar took place in October 1582 by Pope Gregory XIII, hence the name Gregorian. But even this calendar might be a bit off, according to modern research. Scientists say that the events the Gregorian calendar starts its year count with may have happened 4 years earlier. So maybe I'm really speaking to you now from year 2018, not 2022. Have a headache yet? So, wherever you are in the world, if you happen to be talking to an online friend, be careful what you really mean when you say, "Let's catch up next year." You could be waiting for a very long time.
It was April 10th, 1912. Richard had just departed from Southampton, England, aboard the most famous ship of the time, dubbed the Unsinkable. Since he had just witnessed a near collision with the SS City of New York, he decided to write to his wife and report the unfortunate and frightening event. "My dearest Sal," he wrote, "we got away yesterday after a lot of trouble." Little did he know that a mere 4 days later, both his pen and the ship he was on would be lost forever at the bottom of the North Atlantic Ocean. Was this some sort of bad omen? Did Richard actually foresee what was about to happen to the ship he was on? In case you haven't figured it out by now, Mr. Richard Geddes was aboard the Titanic on the day that he wrote the letter to his wife. On April 14th, 1912, the ship seemed to have been lost forever. Along with it, so many secrets and treasures have settled at the bottom of the ocean. It took until 1985 for the Titanic's wreck to be finally rediscovered using state-of-the-art sonar technology. Ever since then, they've managed to recover thousands of items from the Titanic, and many of them went on display or auction. Things like jewelry, a life jacket, a menu from the ship's restaurant, or even a sample square of carpet from the first-class stateroom have all captivated the public's attention, just like the many stories of the people on board. Scientists have even tried to come up with strategies to get the Titanic back up altogether to properly study it and stop it from getting more and more damaged at the bottom of the ocean. Some have suggested filling the wreck with ping pong balls to make it float, while others even considered injecting it with 180,000 tons of Vaseline. Another idea was to use 450,000 tons of liquid nitrogen to trap it in an iceberg that would float to the surface. But they eventually had to let go of all these potential strategies since the Titanic is way too fragile to ever be recovered. The Titanic may be one of the most interesting ships lying at the bottom of the ocean, at least in popular culture, but deep-sea divers have a lot of other stories to share. Planes also sometimes find their way to the bottom of the ocean. Deep-sea divers in Oahu, Hawaii, came across the wreckage of an F-4U Corsair plane. It seems to have crashed into the ocean in 1946, as it didn't have sufficient fuel. If you can dive deep enough, you might even stumble upon statues and lost artifacts, like those found in the world's only underwater archaeological park off the coast of Naples, Italy. It features the ruins of the ancient Roman city of Baia. The underwater statues found here are breathtaking, to say the least. In an ironic twist of events, some of the equipment we intended to use to get us to the moon was lost at the bottom of the sea for a very long time. But how did that happen? Beginning from the late 1960s and ending in the early 70s, many Apollo rockets were launched to orbit the Earth and the Moon. When reaching altitudes of about 38 miles, the first portion of the spacecraft, including the engines, needed to separate. People thought these components got destroyed or lost forever. But were they really? In 2012, a team of specialists discovered a bunch of rocket engines 14,000 feet off the coast of Florida. They have since gone through a 2-year renovation plan and are now on display at Seattle's Museum of Flight. Can you imagine stumbling upon a whole city underwater? Back in 2001, a lost city was discovered in the Gulf of Cambay, off the coast of India. Some archaeologists believe it to be the oldest city in history. By comparison, it's almost the size of Manhattan and features massive walls and even plazas. They stumbled upon pieces of sculpture, artwork, and even what looked like ancient wooden furniture, believed to date back up to 9,500 years ago, and 5,000 years older than any city previously discovered. Okay, how about an underwater river? I can't even imagine what that would look like, but some deep divers claim to have seen it south of Tulum, Mexico. Is that even possible? Well, not really, since the Cenote Angelita Cave is not a true river, but a very special type of optical illusion. It's formed by a halocline, meaning a cloud of hydrogen sulfide at the bottom of this underwater cave. Turns out you can actually swim right through this cloud, which makes you feel like you're swimming through a flowing body of water. Not all things discovered underwater are inanimate objects. Some of them are actually quite scary sea creatures. A jellyfish might not be on your list of things to look out for if you can avoid the stings. But this giant one, also known as a lion's mane jellyfish, is the largest known species of its kind. In all fairness, you'll only uncover it if you happen to dive into the waters of the Arctic, Northern Atlantic, and Northern Pacific Oceans. You surely won't miss it, since it stretches across 120 feet from the top to the bottom of its tentacles. When it comes to deep-sea diving, a lot of people are looking to discover some lost treasure. One diver was lucky enough to have hit the literal jackpot when he came upon nearly $1 million worth of treasure on the bottom of the seabed. That was back in 2015, when this lucky diver was swimming just off the coast of Florida. What did he find, you might ask? Well, about 51 gold coins, 40 feet of gold chain, and a rare single coin that was tailored for the King of Spain, Philip V. Speaking of people looking for lost treasures, divers also sometimes found pirate ships. They discovered one of these pirate shipwrecks in 2015 off the coast of Colombia. It dates back to the 18th century. The value of this forgotten ship was estimated to be between $4 billion and $17 billion, as it contained treasures, precious stones, gold, and countless other really valuable items. By comparison, a whole island in the Bahamas is up for grabs at $75 million. A computer is the last thing you'd ever expect to discover underwater, right? And this was no regular computer, but an ancient one. And yet, someone stumbled upon it between 1900 and 1901 on the spot of a shipwreck located off one Greek island. Researchers believe this weird stone contraption to be the earliest form of a computer. It was designed to serve many purposes, such as predicting astronomical positions and eclipses on the calendar. Since humanity lost most of the technology used back then, it was wonderful to rediscover it so many years later. It let us piece together many of the ancient Greeks' accomplishments. The computer is now at the National Archaeological Museum of Athens, should you ever want to check it out in person. This has to be one of the most mysterious places on Earth. It's called the Mariana Trench, and it's the deepest part of the Earth's oceans. We really don't know how deep it is, since it's so difficult to measure. But it's somewhere around 7 miles deep and 5 times longer than the Grand Canyon. They first studied this massive underwater hole back in 1875 using a weighted rope. Back in 2012, a Canadian film director named James Cameron reached the bottom of the trench in the submersible vessel Deep Sea Challenger. Some of the most bizarre creatures on the planet call this place their home, including the Dumbo octopus, the sea cucumber, and the goblin shark. The Mariana Trench took its name after the nearby Mariana Islands, which are named Las Marianas in honor of the Spanish Queen Mariana of Austria.
Meet Hula Male, also known as the City of Hope. This nickname makes total sense since this artificial island is part of the Maldives' big plan to avoid being completely submerged in the near future. Hula Male was created by placing sand from the seafloor onto a submerged coral platform, and it worked. This city sits about 6 feet above sea level, which means it's twice as high as the Maldives' capital, Male. While more and more people are moving there to live, the island was also designed to serve as a temporary evacuation site during dangerous storms and typhoons. Seychelles is another gem in the Indian Ocean that's at risk of disappearing. Unfortunately, coastal flooding is becoming a common issue there, especially during spring tides and heavy rainfall. The problem is that their main island, Mahé, hosts about 90% of the country's population. Along the coast, it's only about 6 feet above sea level. Fiji is the third tropical paradise on our list, and it's also a top pick for travelers. But this nation is in a tough spot, since it's located right in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where huge storms can really turn things into chaos. Take Cyclone Winston. It hit Fiji back in 2016 and ended up costing them over $1 billion in damage. So one thing they're doing to protect themselves is planting mangroves along the coast and preserving the ones that already exist. These trees are awesome since they help reduce wind speed during cyclone emergencies and also combat erosion by trapping sediments. Egypt might be in trouble too. I mean, it's not like the whole country is going to be underwater and we'll only see the tips of the pyramids in a few years. But things could really change for them as coastal cities are facing a serious risk. Take Alexandria, for instance. 45% of its population already lives below sea level. If the city is flooded, not only will everyone have to move, but Egypt in general will suffer a major impact on its fish production. In Europe, one of the most at-risk populations is in the Netherlands, where about half the people live in areas below sea level. In the future, planning a romantic gesture with tulips for your girlfriend could become an impossible mission. The Netherlands is responsible for 2/3 of the world's tulip production. So if fields are taken over by saltwater, it's game over for the blooms. But the good news is that the Dutch have centuries of experience dealing with water, so knowing how to work with storm barriers and seawalls can prevent them from a doomsday scenario. The risks of rising sea levels probably aren't higher anywhere else than here in Tuvalu. This island chain, located halfway between Australia and Hawaii, could be the first state to become uninhabitable. Its stunning land is only about 9 feet above sea level. And just by looking at it on the map, you can see how narrow it is. In fact, the narrowest part in Fongafale is only about 65 feet wide. So even before higher tides become a real problem, the country's limited farmland could be flooded with saltwater. The next country on our list is the Philippines. This archipelago in Southeast Asia boasts some of the most stunning scenery, but it faces the risk of flooding for two reasons. First, due to rising sea levels, and second, because of crazy, unpredictable weather. Since 1990, events like cyclones, earthquakes, and tsunamis have cost the country over $20 billion. Have you ever heard of Vanuatu? This chain of islands, spread out between Australia and Fiji, could be flooded soon. Vanuatu was one of the first Pacific nations to relocate an entire community to a safer spot. Back in 2005, residents living in risky coastal areas of the northern island of Tegua moved to higher ground. Next up, the Marshall Islands, a country located in the Central Pacific. Studies show that 40% of the buildings in the capital city, Majuro, could end up underwater in the future. But this country isn't throwing in the towel just yet. They've got a game plan. They are fortifying the infrastructures of their low-lying airport, relocating key buildings to higher ground, and putting up seawalls on rural islands. Heading south, we've got Nauru. This is actually one of the smallest countries in the world, covering just 8.1 square miles. Today, it's home to 10,000 people, but it's on the brink of becoming uninhabitable. Water levels are rising about 3 times faster there than the global average. The Buada Lagoon sparks special concern since it's the only surface freshwater resource, and it's located only 16 feet above sea level. Our next stop in the Pacific Ocean is the Republic of Palau. Rising sea levels are no joke for them either, but protecting their crops, especially taro, is a priority at this moment. About halfway between Hawaii and New Zealand lies Samoa, and this country is dealing with a unique situation. Not only is the volume of water increasing there, but their land is also sinking. You see, a couple of strong earthquakes and tsunamis hit Samoa back in 2009. So as the crust bounces back to its original position, the overall land surface is actually going down. Because of this, their housing and main infrastructure could take a serious hit, especially since all their airports are along the coast. Let's head to Kiribati. This Pacific nation has a big problem with frequent flooding because most of its people and infrastructure are near the coast. Apart from the volcanic island of Banaba, none of Kiribati's land is more than 6.5 feet above the ocean. To tackle this situation and keep their population safe, they had this big idea of making a massive floating platform, kind of like the ones oil companies have. But the problem is that it would cost them a fortune, as the project is estimated to be around $2 billion. If visiting Vietnam is on your bucket list, you better hurry up. The top 10 things to do there mostly involve cruising to jaw-dropping spots like down to Ha Long Bay, also known as the Descending Dragons Bay. But by 2050, the surrounding land over there might be underwater. Another huge problem Vietnam is facing is that the main rice fields are getting salty. And if you're into Vietnamese food, you know how important rice is for them. Right now, they're especially concerned about the Mekong Delta region being vulnerable. After all, this is a highly fertile area responsible for most of Vietnam's agricultural output, with over 50% of it being, rice. This nation is really putting in the effort to adjust to this new reality. They're flushing the rice fields in the Mekong Delta with fresh water to get rid of the saltiness. Our next stop is in the Caribbean Sea. Grenada is an island country, but you may know it as the Island of Spice, since its tropical climate is just perfect for cultivating things like nutmeg, cinnamon, cloves, and ginger. Unfortunately, Grenada and its incredible fertile soil also face an uncertain future of being submerged. Let's talk about the last country on our list, the Solomon Islands. 5 islands in this archipelago have already vanished beneath the waves, and 6 others are submerged by 20%. They include the Nusa Evili Island, which was once a hotspot to go to for a picnic in the early 2000s. Even though the situation is complicated, it's important to note that more than 300 of the islands there are inhabited. One thing about the Solomon Islands is that it seems like they're always in some kind of recovery mode, since the country often gets hit by tropical cyclones and flash floods. Their population is already working hard to save their homes from the rising seas by building stone walls along the coast, planting mangroves, and constructing houses in higher areas.
So, you want to get as close to the moon as possible without leaving Earth? Easy. Hop on a plane to Ecuador and climb Mount Chimborazo. I know, it may sound weird, but hear me out. Now, Everest is the tallest mountain when you're measuring from sea level, but Chimborazo's peak is actually the closest spot on Earth to the moon. Here's the physics behind it. Mount Everest is over 29,000 feet tall, and Chimborazo is only around 20,000 feet. But the secret lies in how far they are from the Earth's core. You see, Earth is not a perfect sphere. It's chubby in the middle and slightly squished at the top and the bottom. The chubby part in the middle is called the equator. FYI, the country Ecuador actually translates to equator in Spanish. Now you know. The mountain we're talking about, Chimborazo, is located a few degrees from the equator line. So since the squishy sphere is chubbier in the middle part, Chimborazo's peak sticks out farther into space. This means that if you hike all the way up to this mountain's peak, you'll be a smidge closer to the moon than if you hike all the way up Mount Everest. In the North Sea, off the coast of England, there's a tiny platform bobbing around, roughly the size of 2 tennis courts. You might think it's an oil platform, but this is Sealand, the world's tiniest country. The Ruff's Tower platform was built during the first half of the 20th century as a fort to protect English ships. Jump to the 1960s when a guy named Paddy Roy Bates decided to claim this old fort as his own country, naming it the Principality of Sealand. Paddy gave his country everything it deserved: a national flag, currency, a constitution, stamps, and a hoisting swing system. That's how you get into the country, by the way, hoisted all the way up to the upper part of the platform. Today, this micronation is headed by ruling monarch Michael Bates, who is a member of the country's self-proclaimed royalty. I know, right? Why wait in line for the British throne? The nation has its own fan club, who cheer for the country's national soccer club. Their team competes in international tournaments where they usually play with other tiny nations. Although Sealand only has one official resident as of right now, players from other countries join to help out their soccer team. One of the country's supporters also placed a Sealand flag on top of Mount Everest. Having your kitchen in one country and your living room in another, well, this is the daily reality for some locals in Barle. In this town, the border between Belgium and the Netherlands doesn't just run along streets, it slices right through buildings. So, to navigate this setup, a rule was made that a house's nationality is determined where its front door is located. But this solution created its own problems. There's a house where the front door is exactly on the border, giving it 2 addresses, one in Belgium and one in the Netherlands. The owners of this house were given a unique opportunity. They could choose which country they'd like to get their utilities from, like gas and water. And you guessed it, they picked the country where the stuff was cheaper, in this case, Belgium. Down in Senegal, Africa, there's a lake that looks like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. About 18 miles north of the capital, Dakar, you'll find Lake Retba, also known as La Rosa. This lake is famous for its bright pink water. Yes, it really is pink, and you can even take a swim if you're up for it. But be prepared, the water is super salty, one of the saltiest lakes in the world with salt levels over 40%. The pink color comes from a species of tiny algae. These algae produce red pigments that reflect sunlight, giving the lake its unique shade. If you want to see the lake at its brightest pink, visit during the dry season from November to June. The rainwater during other times of the year can wash away some of the color. Oh, by the way, there are other pink lakes around the world, like Lake Hillier in Western Australia and Lake Natron in Tanzania. So there's a hill that seems to be on fire all the time. Located in the Arctic region of Canada, the Smoking Hills are a truly unique sight on Earth. Some of the minerals found here are so rare that they've only been spotted on Mars. For at least a couple of hundred years, the ground here has been smoking continuously. At first, explorers thought this was due to an active volcano, but it turns out the smoke comes from something else. The soil in the smoking hills contains sulfur and coal, and when these materials mix with oxygen, they can spontaneously catch fire and keep on burning. But don't get any adventurous ideas about visiting. The environment here is extremely harsh, there's toxic smoke, and the temperatures can be dangerously high. So, I'd try Orlando. New Zealand is famous for its stunning landscapes, but it also has a hidden treasure underground. Deep in some caves in the country's North Island, you can find a mesmerizing natural wonder. To see it, you'll need to go down about 150 feet in a series of dark, twisting caves. As you go deeper, you'll enter complete darkness until you reach the cave ceilings, which are lined with tiny glowing creatures. These are New Zealand's native glowworms, which are the larvae of a special type of fungus gnat found only in this country. They shine a bright blue light to attract prey. If you get a chance to tour these caves, it feels like floating through a galaxy, with thousands of these living stars sparkling above and their glow reflecting in the water beneath your boat. It's an incredible sight, like stepping into a magical glowing world. Mexico is home to one of the most amazing caves in the world, called the Cave of Crystals. If you think you've seen big crystals before, wait until you see these. In around 1910, miners in the town of Nica, Chihuahua, like the dog, discovered a cave full of clear selenite crystals. But it wasn't until 90 years later that they found an even more incredible cave filled with enormous crystals, some as long as 39 feet and weighing up to 55 tons. Scientists believe that 26 million years ago, give or take, hot, mineral-rich water filled this cave, allowing these huge crystals to grow. The Nica crystals are thought to be the biggest in the world, making people standing next to them look teeny in comparison. However, exploring the cave isn't easy. Inside, temperatures reach 136 degrees Fahrenheit. Even with protection, people can only stay inside for 20 to 30 minutes. It's an extraordinary place, but not exactly a comfortable one for humans. Mauritius is famous for its beautiful beaches and clear blue waters. But it also has a stunning optical illusion at its southwest corner that looks like an underwater waterfall. Even though it seems like water is flowing down into the ocean, what you're actually seeing is a trick of the light and the seafloor. The island is on an ocean shelf that's only about 500 feet deep, but just beyond the edge, it drops down to 2.5 miles deep. This drop creates the illusion of a waterfall as currents push sand and particles over the edge, making it look like water is cascading down. So, while it's not a real underwater waterfall, it's definitely a cool sight to see from a boat. Now here's a place that might either give you chills or leave you in awe, depending on when you visit. Near the small town of Gryfino in Poland, there's a forest of pine trees with a strange twist. They're all bent at their bases. During the day, these trees with their sharp 90-degree curves look fascinating and even a bit whimsical. You might even find a comfortable spot to sit on if you're having a picnic. But visit the crooked forest at night, and it takes on a whole different vibe. A thin layer of fog hangs around, making the forest look eerie and a bit spooky. Plus, scientists still don't know why for sure the trees are bent like this. So, would you prefer to see it in the bright light of day or the mysterious dark of night? Ooh. Around 2,500 years ago, an earthquake completely changed the course of one of the largest and most famous rivers on the planet, the Ganges. Now, it's normal for rivers not to sit in one place, so if you live next to one, it could also just disappear without a trace or flood the whole city one day. In the case of the Ganges River, a supermassive earthquake became the reason for this dramatic change. Scientists say it might happen again, and it would be a huge problem for millions of people who depend on this river. The Ganges River starts as small streams in the Himalayas, and travels a long way, over 1,500 miles. Along its journey, it meets other big rivers before all the water flows into the Bay of Bengal. The Ganges has the largest delta in the world among all rivers. Just like many other rivers in the region, it slowly changes its path over time. These changes, if they happen when a river wears away its banks, usually takes a long time, sometimes decades. Scientists have discovered that the Ganges-Brahmaputra river system has shifted several times over the last 6,000 years. When they looked at satellite images of the Ganges Delta, they noticed something interesting. There was a crescent-shaped dip in the ground about 28 miles away from where the river is flowing now. This depression was over 1 mile wide and stretched for many miles. They thought it might have been an old main channel of the Ganges River a long time ago. In 2018, the team decided to visit the area to check it out for themselves and take samples to learn more about it. While driving back home, they noticed a pit where someone was digging dirt to create a pond. The next day, they planned to fill it with water, but the researchers spotted something strange in the dirt. There were vertical bands of light-colored sand mixed into the darker mud. These special layers are clues from the past. They show that an ancient earthquake made sand and water shoot up from below the ground and created sand volcanoes that were trapped in time. The scientists studied the sand and mud and figured out that these earthquakes happened around 2,500 years ago and were strong, with magnitudes of 7 to 8. The epicenter was over 110 miles away from the main stem of the river, but it was powerful enough to displace it. It could have affected around 140 million people. The Ganges-Brahmaputra system is close to spots where Earth's tectonic plates meet, so earthquakes happen here often. There's no danger right now, but scientists think that another massive earthquake could happen in the next few hundred or thousand years. It could threaten up to 170 million people. That's about half the population of the U.S. No one can predict exactly when an earthquake will happen or how strong it will be. Learning how earthquakes in the past moved rivers helps scientists figure out patterns and make guesses about similar events in the future. This knowledge could help us prepare better and create safety plans before another big earthquake strikes. Now, the Ganges isn't the only river at risk. The Yellow River, the Irrawaddy River, and rivers in the United States, like the Klamath and San Joaquin, all face similar dangers. The mighty Mississippi River has also switched its path many times over the last 7,000 years. Right now, there's a huge system of dams and barriers called a control structure in central Louisiana. This structure's job is to stop the Mississippi from spilling over its banks and joining a nearby river. But scientists think that, in theory, these barriers wouldn't handle megafloods. So the Mississippi could break free and change its course again. This would cause massive problems, especially in southern Louisiana. One of the recent examples when a river changing its course caused disaster was the Kosi River in India. In August 2008, over just a few days, the river's path shifted by almost 60 miles, which is a huge change. Floods happen in some parts of the state rather often, but they hadn't seen such strong ones in over 50 years. They affected around 1,000 villages and 3 million people, and about 1 million people had to be evacuated to safety. Since many of these people hadn't faced floods in so long, they weren't ready to handle it quickly. It caused even more damage to their homes and lives. Scientists have been trying for decades to figure out what exactly makes rivers suddenly change their course. A new study explains that two things work together to make a river to do it. This process is called avulsion. First, there's the setup, which is like building up tension before something big happens. Over time, sediment, sand, dirt, and other stuff carried by the river gets deposited in certain places. It either raises the river above the land around it or makes a nearby slope steeper than the river's current path. Then there's the trigger, which is like the final straw that makes everything happen. This trigger could be a big flood, an earthquake, or even something like a pile of logs blocking the water. Now, researchers looked at satellite images of about 170 cases of avulsion from the past 50 years. They noticed these events happen most often near river mouths and near mountains. Rivers were about 3 times more likely to change course in these places than in the areas between them. They also studied 58 river channels in detail, using super clear maps to measure super elevation. That's how high the river is compared to the land around it. They also measured slope advantage. That's how steep a new path might be compared to the river's current one. They found that near mountains, rivers often pile up so much sediment that they become super elevated and spill over. But near river mouths, like in deltas, rivers need a steep slope advantage to break through the mud and form a new path. These two factors work together like a seesaw. If one is stronger, the other doesn't need to be as strong for an avulsion to happen. To figure out where a river might go if it changes course, the researchers created a smart computer algorithm. This tool uses maps to measure the terrain steepness and the river's flow to predict where the river might move. They tested it on 10 past avulsions, and it correctly guessed the path every single time. Scientists hope they could use these findings to protect people living near rivers from sudden floods. Rivers changing course played a big role in creating one of the first organized administration systems in the world. Scientists found clues for this in the territory of ancient Mesopotamia. This name means the land between two rivers, and it was between the rivers Tigris and the Euphrates. People living there relied on these rivers for water, food, and transportation. Scientists wanted to figure out how these sudden changes in these rivers affected ancient people. To do this, they used 2 kinds of maps. The archaeological maps show how ancient cities grew over time, including what types of buildings people built. Certain buildings, like big palaces or city walls, could show when each city first had an organized administration. The second kind of map showed where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers flowed long ago. They often shifted, sometimes slowly, and sometimes very quickly and dramatically. Around the year 5000 BCE, Mesopotamia started to become drier and farming became harder. Farmers had to grow their crops near rivers, where they could use the natural floods to water their fields or dig little channels to bring river water to their plants. Because farming was so important, towns and cities grew near the rivers too, so people could stay close to their food. But when a river suddenly changed its course, people didn't give up. They worked together to dig long canals to bring water from the new river path back to their fields. The canals helped them get water again, and the administration buildings showed they were organizing as a community to solve big problems together.
You're standing in the middle of a vast, empty desert in Saudi Arabia. But in the middle of that emptiness, 2 enormous mirrored skyscrapers rise side by side, in perfect parallel to each other. This isn't just some sci-fi concept, it's the line, the centerpiece of Saudi Arabia's boldest urban project yet. Now, Saudi Arabia is already home to some of the most ambitious architecture in the world, from Riyadh's King Abdullah Financial District to the iconic Abraj Al Bayt Towers in Mecca. They've been working hard for years. But the line is in a league of its own. This project was announced in 2021, and it is part of a larger vision for the country's future called NEOM, a $500 billion mega project designed to redefine how people live, work, and interact with the environment. I mean, what could go wrong, right? Well, I don't know. But Nadmi Al Nasser, the longtime chief executive of the ambitious project, has recently departed. Suspicious. Even more so because NEOM's statement issued soon after did not give any plausible reason for his departure. Then, the line project itself was originally expected to cost around $200 billion. But by 2024, that number had skyrocketed to a mind-blowing $2 trillion. That's about twice Saudi Arabia's entire GDP. And if you ask independent experts, they think it could end up costing even more. At first, the plan was to build about 10 miles of the project and have 1.5 million people living there by 2030. By now, the expectations are way more modest. Only just under 1.5 miles are likely to be done by 2030, with fewer than 300,000 residents. the project has come across a lot of problems along the way. Engineering issues and management problems have caused major delays, and progress hasn't been as fast as hoped. And now, let's figure out what exactly is the Line. It's a literal city made up of 2 parallel skyscrapers, each towering 1,640 feet high. That's higher than almost all the tallest skyscrapers in the world. These skyscrapers are 656 feet wide and stretch for a mind-boggling 106 miles across the northwest of Saudi Arabia, right near the Red Sea. The most astounding thing? The entire city is actually within this one structure. There are no cars, no roads, no emissions. But we'll go into detail a bit later. The complex is supposed to house 9 million people, and all of this running entirely on clean energy. Such a project aligns perfectly with Saudi Arabia's ambitious Vision 2030 plan. The outside of the skyscrapers will be covered in mirrors that will reflect the surrounding desert landscape, creating an almost seamless blend between the city and its surroundings. Inside, there will be lush parks, cascading waterfalls, flying taxis, and even robot helpers to take care of everyday tasks. They're also planning to make an artificial moon as part of the city's design. One more thing that makes the Line so unique is its design. Unlike traditional cities that spread out horizontally, the Line is vertical. Everything, homes, offices, parks, schools, shopping centers, are stacked on top of each other in layers. This means that residents won't need to travel long distances to get what they need. In fact, the designers promise that all amenities will be within a 5-minute walk from anywhere in the city. And while it's compact in width, the city's vertically layered structure means it can comfortably fit all 9 million residents, while leaving plenty of room for parks, natural spaces, and modern conveniences. There's even a plan for year-round climate control, keeping both indoor and outdoor spaces at comfortable temperatures, no matter how harsh the desert weather gets. Of course, even with everything close by, people will still need to get around the city. Worry not, the Line has it covered in the most futuristic way possible. It features a high-speed train system that will travel from one end of the city to the other in just 20 minutes. That's 106 miles in 20 minutes with only 4 stops along the way. Imagine being able to get anywhere in the city faster than you could drive across town in most places today. Besides the train, the Line will also have autonomous vehicles. Those will be cars and shuttles driving themselves with the help of advanced technology. They will handle everything from parking to going around obstacles. Even cooler, in the Line, every car, train, and any other piece of infrastructure will be connected in a huge network called the Internet of Things. Sensors and real-time data will allow traffic to flow smoothly, preventing delays and reducing congestion. They first spoke about the NEOM project in 2017. Besides the Line, NEOM is supposed to include an octagon-shaped floating industrial city and a posh mountain ski resort. There, Saudi Arabia will host the Asian Winter Games in 2029. Plus, there will be the world's largest green energy plant, which will make the region self-sufficient and sustainable. The goal of NEOM is to attract people from around the world, not just to visit, but to live there. Residents will even be given their own identity, Neomians. Not everyone thinks this construction is a good idea. Some urban planners and architects have pointed out pretty big flaws in the city's straight line layout. You see, in a regular city like Johannesburg, which covers way more ground than the Line, 2 random people are usually only about 20 miles apart. But in the Line, the average distance between 2 random people would be 35 miles. That's almost double, even though the Line's overall area is way smaller. This setup could make it harder for people to connect socially and might be a pain to navigate, even with a high-speed train zipping through it. Now, they promise that every resident will have everything they need within a 5-minute walk, but there are doubts too. People wonder if living in a super compact, stacked-up design might end up feeling claustrophobic or even too much to handle. As for the whole mirrored exterior idea, it looks pretty cool in renderings. But there's an opinion it could actually mess with the environment. Reflecting all that sunlight in a desert might disturb local wildlife or create unexpected heat issues. The line's high-tech features sound amazing, but they come with their own set of headaches. The city is supposed to run on the Internet of Things tech and autonomous vehicles. Sounds awesome, right? But how are they going to pull that off for a 106-mile-long city? For things to run smoothly, every piece of tech, cars, trains, infrastructure, needs to be perfectly in sync, sharing tons of real-time data. If there's even a tiny glitch, it could throw a wrench into daily life for millions of people. Then there's that high-speed train. It does sound like a dream, but actually building and keeping it running in the middle of a desert is not so easy. The heat, shifting sands, and wear and tear on the tracks could cause big delays and rack up costs pretty quickly. People around the world are questioning if the line is even doable. The first inhabitants were supposed to start living there by 2030, but there are reports about scaling the project back, so that deadline feels like a big stretch. There's also a sustainability issue. The line is supposed to have zero emissions and 100% clean energy. But building something so massive is bound to take tons of resources. With all these challenges, Saudi Arabia is looking into new ways to fund the line and figure out which parts of their Vision 2030 projects to prioritize. An insider has recently said that some projects might go ahead as planned, while others could be delayed or scaled down. This lines up with what Ali Shahabi, who's on NEOM's advisory board, has said. He admitted that the Vision 2030 goals were always meant to be super ambitious. Like, almost too ambitious. But he argued that even if they only pull off part of it in time, it'll still be a big deal. In 1850, French scientist Auguste Mariette went to Egypt looking for manuscripts, but accidentally found a head of a sphinx sticking out of the dunes. He cleared the sand and figured out the sphinx was guiding the entrance to some underground construction. Several months later, he finally entered the Serapium of Saqqara. Inside, he found an enormous granite sarcophagi with remnants of 64 bulls. Scientists are still amazed by the tech that the ancient Egyptians used to transport those enormous boxes. The Serapium was built around the year 3000 before the Common Era. It was an underground tomb built to honor the sacred Apis bulls of ancient Egypt. It had a long hallway, almost 500 feet long, with giant stone rooms on both sides. Some of the sarcophagi weighed as much as 50 average cars, and all of them were made with super precision, with exact 90-degree angles. These sarcophagi were beautifully decorated with hieroglyphs and carvings that told stories about the lives and importance of the Apis bulls. Now, there are 24 sarcophagi left. In ancient Egypt, Apis bulls were very special animals connected to the deity Ptah. They thought the bulls carried Ptah's spirit and wisdom, helped the pharaoh, and protected the Egyptians. Priests looked for special markings on young bulls to find Apis bulls. It could be a white triangle on its forehead, which symbolized divine light, a shape on its back like a vulture's wing, and a scarab shape under its tongue, which stood for rebirth. If a bull had these signs, they believed it was chosen by Ptah and treated it like royalty. The chosen bulls lived in a special temple in Memphis, the city where they worshipped Ptah. They received the best care and offerings from visitors who wanted their blessings. When an Apis bull passed away, it was treated with great honor and mummified. When Mariette entered the Serapium, he noticed traces of rollers on the gallery's floor and found 2 wooden horizontal winches. Each had 8 levers. Later, other explorers saw double rails. The burial chambers were lower than the hallway floor. To get the boxes into place, workers filled the chambers with sand so the sarcophagi could be rolled in straight. Then they slowly removed the sand to gently lower the boxes into perfectly cut spaces in the bedrock. A carved stone sign found in the Serapium said it took 28 days to move just one sarcophagus and its lid into its spot during the time of Ptolemy II. The extreme precision of the sarcophagi with 90-degree angles also has an explanation. Ancient Egyptians wrote texts, or rather, papyrus, on geometry, a long time ago. It shows that they knew the approximate number pi and could calculate the volume of a pyramid with its top cut off. If they could figure out complicated math like that back then, it makes sense that they could also carve perfectly flat surfaces 500 years later. All this sounds pretty legit, but some people think certain things don't add up here. The size of boxes is way larger than the size of bulls, yet they buried pharaohs in tiny coffins that barely fit their bodies. The sarcophagi are made out of granite with crazy precision, and they could have just used limestone, which would have made things way easier. The transportation of the boxes seems pretty simple, but only in theory. If one person could pull about 440 pounds, then at least 250 people would be needed to pull just one box. The tunnels in the Serapium are really narrow, only about 2 feet wider than the boxes themselves. There's no way hundreds of people could have squeezed into those tight spaces to pull the boxes. And even if they did, how would they turn the box in the cramped corridor, lower it into its niche, and place it perfectly in the middle? Somehow, they did this 24 times, and every box is centered perfectly. Plus, the chambers were dusty, and there were no signs of soot from lamps. This means they must have worked in almost complete darkness. The real use of the boxes could also be different. A long time ago, even before the Egyptian pharaohs ruled, the local people already knew how to use fermentation. It happens when tiny organisms called yeast eat certain ingredients like starch and turn them into gas and ethanol. So someone in ancient Egypt probably put food like barley, bread, and even meat inside a giant stone box, then closed it tight with a heavy lid. These stone boxes, carved from granite, were so precisely made that they were almost completely sealed, so nothing could escape from it. As the yeast inside the box started working, it created more and more CO2 gas. It built up pressure inside the box. The granite boxes were incredibly strong. They could handle more pressure than a car tire can hold. When granite was squeezed under such pressure, its crystals produced a tiny electric charge. This effect was possible because granite contains quartz, a material that reacts to pressure this way. The process also needed meat or animal parts, possibly to help the yeast grow better. Meat contains something called oleic acid, which yeast needs to keep growing and to survive the bad effects of the ethanol it produces. As the pressure inside the box kept growing, the combination of gases and electricity made these boxes not just ancient fridges, but powerful energy systems. Over time, the pressure inside got so strong that it could push the lid open and the gas would escape with a pop. But when people rediscovered the Serapium in 1850, they found old drawings that showed piles of stones stacked on top of some of the box lids. So, someone long ago probably tried to make the lids even heavier by adding extra weight to make it harder for the gas pressure to push them open. This extra weight also meant the quartz crystals in the granite could keep creating more electricity under all that pressure. If someone opened one of these stone boxes thousands of years later, they would only find bones from bulls that were placed in the box. And that's exactly what Mariette discovered in the 1850s. They opened the Serapium for visitors soon after the first excavations in the second half of the 19th century. Prince of Wales even had a luncheon with his guests in one of the sarcophagi. Sands and earthquakes made the site inaccessible for a while, but now you can visit it again and try to solve the mystery yourself. With new tech, we could have answers to many other historical mysteries soon. A team of scientists at Chicago's Field Museum of Natural History recently used a special CT scanner to learn more about ancient Egyptian mummies without unwrapping them. They gently rolled 26 mummies on custom carts out to the parking lot, where the scanner was waiting. It took thousands of detailed X-ray pictures of each mummy and their coffins. When all the pictures were put together, they created 3D images that showed what was inside, the skeletons, and some artifacts. The scientists hope these images will help them understand ancient Egyptian burial practices from over 3,000 years ago. Even though the scanning process only took 4 days, it might take 3 years to study all the data. But scientists were able to learn some personal details about the mummies. One of the most popular mummified individuals at the museum, Lady Chineta, was a woman who lived in ancient Egypt about 3,000 years ago. It looks like she passed away in her late 30s or early 40s. To make sure her body looked complete for the afterlife, embalmers put stuffing in her neck to keep it from collapsing. They also placed artificial eyes in her sockets, so she would have eyes in the next world. She was wrapped in fancy linen and placed in a beautifully decorated coffin. The scans revealed that it had been carefully crafted with a slit at the back, which embalmers used to fit the body. There were also some artistic details on the surface, like markings for her knees. It looks like her burial was on the scale of a high-end luxury car.
So get this. Taylor Swift takes a flight from Los Angeles to Tokyo that leaves at 10 a.m. on February 20th. She's on the plane for 12 hours, but she lands only at 2 p.m. the next day in Tokyo. That's a 28-hour difference. So, how did this time warp happen? Well, it's all because of this wonky line. This is the International Date Line. You know, that imaginary line that slices the globe in half and decides who gets to celebrate the new year first? It's the Line Islands, by the way. But crossing this line doesn't just make you feel like you've stepped into a transporter. It actually changes your day. Cross from east to west and boom, it's 24 hours later. If you travel in the opposite direction, crossing the line from the western side to the eastern side, you go back an entire calendar day. Now, you'd think that the International Date Line would be a nice, neat, straight line in the ocean where the time zones switch. But in reality, it's as if someone took a ruler and said, let's make this complicated. The line zigzags all over the place, wrapping around islands and causing all sorts of head-scratching confusion. For instance, Big Diomede Island and Little Diomede Island are only 2.5 miles apart, but have a 21-hour time difference. And things can get a little more complicated depending on which time zone a country follows. For example, if you travel 659 miles across the date line from Baker Island to Tokelau, you must add 25 hours. In other words, that's 1 day and 1 hour. And if that doesn't sound weird enough for you, wait, it gets crazier. When it's 6 o'clock in the morning on Thursday in New York, it's still Wednesday night in American Samoa. Meanwhile, over in Kiribati, it's already Friday. Yep, we're talking about 3 different calendar days happening at the same time because of this one imaginary crazy line. This phenomenon occurs every day between 10 o'clock and 10:59 in the morning. So, why does the International Date Line look so ridiculous in the first place? Well, great question. Although these zigzags may seem completely arbitrary, they actually have a logical basis. It's pretty much a made-up concept based on the Earth's rotation. The Earth is always spinning, thank goodness, and it takes about 24 hours, or a day, to complete one full rotation. To keep things in sync, people took the Earth and divided it into 24 time zones, each 15 degrees apart. But what is the starting point for a day on Earth? Well, basically, people needed to figure out which of these 24 zones or lines would be the starting line, or the chronocenter. They needed a reference point, a line where they could begin adding or subtracting time as you move east or west. That line is what we now call the prime meridian. But here's the catch. Deciding where to put this starting line, the prime meridian, is totally arbitrary. The idea of establishing a line where days begin and end goes all the way back to at least the 1300s. Back then, map makers were doing their own thing, picking their own east-west dividing lines called meridians, which, by the way, is just a fancy Latin word for midday. Without a universal standard for when a day officially started or ended, sailors on long voyages just had to wing it, figuring out how to handle the time they were gaining or losing along the way. So, in 1884, people decided to organize this whole mess. 25 nations gathered at the prestigious International Meridian Conference in the United States with one big goal: to decide on a line that would serve as the official prime meridian. Finally, like it or not, they were determined to create the International Date Line that the whole world would accept and would follow from that point forward. The prime meridian was established in Greenwich, England, and the International Date Line was placed on the opposite side, running through the 180th meridian. Well, sounds simple, right? But that's when the nightmare really began. The chosen international dateline didn't just wander through uninhabited areas. Oh no! It split some countries in half and created all sorts of chaos. I mean, if you divide the world with a completely straight vertical line, you end up with situations where half of a country is 1 day ahead and the other half is 1 day behind. Take Kiribati, for example. The country is primarily centered in the Gilbert Islands, which sits just west of the international dateline. However, in 1979, their territory got a little bigger with the Phoenix and Line Islands, which are way east of the dateline. Suddenly, Kiribati was straddling the international dateline. This created a bit of a headache for businesses. Folks on either side could only communicate by radio or phone for 4 weekdays a week. Now, to fix this quirky situation, Kiribati decided to skip Saturday, December 31st, 1994, right off the calendar. So Friday, December 30th, turned into Sunday, January 1st, 1995. And just like that, New Year's Day came a day early. Woohoo! After that, the dateline moved eastward to go around the entire country. So the same thing that happened to Kiribati happened to other countries as well. For example, when they got to the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, the line made another detour to include them. And when they got south of the equator, well, guess what? Another eastward bend to cover even more islands. And that's pretty much why the straight line started to get a bit ziggy-zaggy. This wonky line is designed to avoid land as much as possible, so there's less hassle when it comes to changing days. So, no, you can't stand between the international dateline, like having one foot in one day and the other in the next. But you can cross it by boat. In fact, some fancy trans-Pacific cruises even offer a time travel package for adventurous travelers who want to cross the line and jump into the future. Now, in the end, the international dateline looks this ridiculous because it was constructed based on a series of arbitrary decisions, historical quirks, and a whole lot of confusion. But it's not just because people organized it in the 19th century that there is no confusion regarding time zones today. Another thing that the prime meridian establishes is Coordinated Universal Time, the famous UTC. Now, UTC never changes for daylight savings time or anything else. However, in 1908, Canada decided to spice things up by creating Daylight Saving Time, or DST. Their idea was to set the clocks 1 hour ahead of standard time to make better use of sunlight in the spring and summer and fall evenings. The idea was so brilliant that most countries jumped on board, but not everyone. Just look at Nepal. They have never ever used the daylight savings time, which means their clocks do not change throughout the entire year. As you probably know, countries with large territories often have more than one time zone. Just like the United States, which has 11 time zones. Australia has 9, while India is a special case. Look, India is a big country with an area that stretches around 1,800 miles from west to east. So it should have 3 time zones in total, but they only have 1. This means that the sun rises almost 90 minutes earlier in Dong in the Far East than in Gujar Moti in the West. And why do they have only 1 time zone? Well, basically, because they can. Just remember that the international dateline and time zones are invisible, artificial, and now you know, totally arbitrary. So if a country wants to stick with just 1 time zone to simplify processes and business operations within its border, then hey, why not? That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a